Call the meeting to order, please. We're going to go ahead and start. We're still awaiting Trustee Pollock's arrival, but we'll go ahead and get started because we have a very long agenda tonight. This is the Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, July 19th, 2018. The time is 7 p.m. Please call the roll.
President Sells.
Here.
Trustee Gisa.
Here.
Trustee Lumsden.
Here.
Trustee Valerie.
Here.
Trustee Sudby.
Here.
Trustee Peters.
Here.
Village Manager Francis.
Here.
Village Attorney Mars.
Here.
Also present Village Clerk Haley, and we are anticipating the arrival of Trustee Pollock.
Yes. Please join us for the pledge.
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and welcome to everyone who is here with us this evening, and to those of you watching at home. You're welcome to make a comment to the village board anytime you wish. You can do it during public comment, or you can wait till we get to a particular agenda item that you would like to comment on. If you make a comment, I ask that you come to the podium and make your comment from the podium so that the folks at home can hear and see what you have to say. First up this evening are presentations. We have a number of certificates of appreciation for our police department. Chief Weitzel.
Good evening, President Sells, Trustees, and Manager Francis. So I'm tonight presenting some certificates of appreciation to some of our longtime, now former employees in some cases. They're all our dispatch communication employees. As you know, we consolidated our dispatch center with North Riverside, McCook, and Brookfield, and it's now housed in North Riverside. So we no longer have these employees actually working at our facility. So some of them have been here a long, long time, so I wanted to acknowledge them in front of a board and our residents for their long years of service. And what I would like to do, Mr. President, is I'll read the background I have them. We'll give them their certificates, ask them to stay up there. I'll do that one by one. And then if they would like to address the board, they can come up after that, if that's okay with the President. Okay. So I'm going to start with our part-time. Two of them aren't here right now that I see. So is Dan Bojeski was with us for 2 years. Dan actually was with us for longer, but he was one of our interns, and then he accepted a position with as a part-time dispatcher in 2016. When we consolidated, he has since obtained another job outside of law enforcement, but with corporate security. So I will make sure that Dan gets his. Also not with us tonight is Artie Grossi, who was with us for 5 years. Artie worked for Lyons Police Department and North Riverside Police Department before joining us part-time for 5 years. He came to us very skilled. He currently now is one of the employees that went over to the Consolidated Dispatch Center. So the reason he's not here tonight is because he's working. So he's unable to make it, so I will make sure that Artie gets his certificate also. So my next employee would be Jim Moldenhauer, who's here. Jim, why don't you step up here? So Jim was with us for 9 years. When he came to us part-time, he was working full-time in LaGrange Park. He also had a stint in Naperville. As you can imagine, Naperville is a very large municipality, so he came to us with a great wealth of knowledge. Jim is still working for the Consolidated Dispatch right now in LaGrange, and LaGrange takes in LaGrange Park, and Western Springs currently. He's a full-time employee over there, he would fill in. And let me say before I do the rest of our part-timers here, we couldn't operate without them. We only have 4 full-time communicators when they worked here. They did fire, police, EMS, and handled the front window because we were open 24 hours a day, and they handled mutual aid response that would come into our town or we would go to another municipality. So it was a lot for one telecommunicator to handle. So when we looked for part-timers, we looked for skilled part-timers that already had the skill, and Jim was one of those. So I would like to present, I'd like to read this first, and then when I present them, they all say the same thing with a different person's name on it. But let me read this. Some of these employees here have been a long time. In fact, some of these employees, I didn't need these readers when you guys started. But this one says, Riverside Police Department 2018, Jim Moldenhauer. The Riverside Police and Fire Departments wish to acknowledge your service and your loyalty to the Village of Riverside, its residents, and our officers. Your exceptional service through the years has made a great deal of difference, enhancing our department and the community. We are grateful for each and every year you spent in Riverside and offer our heartfelt thanks for a job well done. It's signed by myself and it's signed by Chief Buckley. Because remember, they didn't do just police dispatching, they did dispatching for the fire and EMS. And we also have a little plaque for them that says their name, in this case, Jim Moldenheimer, in appreciation of your service 2009 to 2018. And I'm proud to have had you worked for us, and congratulations.
Thanks, Chief.
Dina, could you come on up next to me? Okay, let me tell you a little bit about Dina Wetzler. She was with us for 8 years, and she started with us in 2010. She also came with a wealth of experience. She came to us from the Illinois State Police, which you can imagine is a very large organization, so she was very skilled in her profession. Dina also secured a job at the new dispatch center, so she's working over at the Consolidated Dispatch Center in North Riverside. She was pretty much I think the one big difference with Dina now is she sees light, because she worked permanent midnights for us for 8 years straight. And she was able to secure a day shift job at the new facility, the new dispatch center, because of her seniority. So, the only time I really saw Dina was when I was coming in the morning and she was leaving. But I can tell you that if residents called 911 or you called the non-emergency number, you talked to one of these individuals, I guarantee it. This was our staff that was working here. So I want to thank Dina for working here. I'm glad she was able to secure a job at the center. I'm still able to hear her on the radio, and once in a while we see her over there, and I'm glad she was able to get, after 8 years, she could get a shift if she can sleep at night. So I'd like to give you this, and I thank you for all your service to us. It was very So Michael Kwan, get a stand up here. So let me tell you a little bit about Michael Kwan. He was with us for 20 years as a part-timer. When Mike came to us in 1998, I had a lot more hair and it wasn't gray. And he worked in Lyons at that time full-time. Mike also did stints at other locations. I think he worked at Stickney for a while. He currently is full-time dispatching for the Cook County Sheriff's Police, another very large organization, and they work out of the city of Des Plaines. They have a state police building out there. I'm happy to report that Mike was able to secure a part-time position at the Consolidated Dispatch Center in North Riverside. And that's really important because these part-timers that work for us, they can step right into, because we're using the same computer system and the same records management system and the same CAD system. So when we consolidated, the Consolidated Dispatch Center took Riverside's network, took Riverside's software, because quite frankly, we had the best. These individuals already could use that software the minute they worked, which did not, then they don't have to train them for months. So I really know Mike for I knew him 20 years he's here, but I knew him before that, because you worked next door to us in Lyons, and you worked next door to us in Stickney, and he's just a wonderful individual. Mike worked all shifts, so if we needed him to work days or afternoons or midnights, and you can imagine these individuals had to juggle between their full-time position, because their full-time job was their main source of income and their profession, and they would come over to us part-time. So he's just been fantastic. I consider all these individuals personal friends, and I know the residents. You probably heard Mike on the radio too. So I would like to say thank you for your years of service and your loyalty and dedication. I'm honored to have had you work for us. Thank you. My next one, we're going to our full-timers, and I'm going to say this, so I'd ask Cheryl to step up here. So Cheryl Rini Lara had worked for us, and still does, and I'll go into how that happened. But Cheryl's worked for us for 18 years. full-time. She came to us in 2000, and at that time she was working for Gottlieb Hospital, took a job with us, and stayed with us for 18 years. She's very skilled. And as part of the transition to the Consolidated Dispatch Center, with the consultation of the board and the manager, we combined positions in the police and fire department to make one public safety analyst. So Cheryl is our public safety analyst that is shared between myself and Chief Buckley to make it more efficient and consolidate that two people into one. So Cheryl is still working for us 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. She handles a lot of administrative duties for both the police department and the fire department. I was glad she agreed to accept that position when it was offered to her. And it's just fantastic. And, it was a decision she had to make because, quite honest, she had 18 years as a union member. Our telecommunicators were unionized. Cheryl stepped out of the union. She wanted to stay with the village of Riverside. I don't think it's so much the police department. She loved working for this village. She gave up that to stay on here in a civilian capacity, and I'm very thankful for that. And Cheryl, I'm so happy that you worked for us and you continue to work for us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Now I have my longest employee. Here it is. And so there's a little bit different. I saved Jean till the end for a little bit different because Jean actually retired. So Jean has been with us for basically almost as long as I've been here. But no, she's been with us she's been in public safety communications for 30 years. She was here in Riverside for over 20, but Jean worked for other police departments before coming to us. Probably too much to mention. I believe she worked a stint in Orland Park, Hometown, and there's probably a few others I'm missing in there. But when she came to us, she found a home, and she worked for us permanently. And when we transitioned over to the Consolidated Dispatch Center, she decided she wanted to retire after a combination of 30 years in this position. But I want to tell you a little bit about how important she was to us. So she was permanent days. So if you called the police department on the day shift, you probably talked to her. And if you came into the window, you probably talked to Jean. She's a people person. Sometimes she struck up long conversations with residents in the lobby, which was a very good thing. But in 2011, we decided to redo our mission statement, and Jean led that charge. So she's a civilian employee, remember? We put her on this team with our sworn officers and to do our mission statement. And the mission statement you see now, much of the verbiage that's in there is from her. She took the lead in that, and she presented that here at the board, along with the chief. And, I mean, her skill administratively is also strong. She was always strong on the radio, always strong administratively, and always had positive comments from our residents. And I was really sad that she didn't take a position at the center, but I understood why. She's already done 30 years. In fact, you look pretty tan. You've probably been traveling. And this is just a level of skill. And, by no means did the Village of Riverside let our employees go because they didn't do their job. We had to part ways with the way it was because the law was changed, and we were mandated to consolidate. And we went to our employees ahead of time, and we told them that. And those that could secure new jobs did, and those that wanted to retire could, and Jean was one of the ones to retire. So I really consider Jean a personal friend of mine. I often tell my officers that this weapon that you wear most of the time won't save your life. These individuals will. When you need them and you get on the police radio and you need assistance and you need help, that 95% of the time, that's what we need. We just need more manpower, we need more officers. They're the ones that do that. And I stand by that. After 34 years here, I stand by that statement that they're the ones that save lives. They're the ones that the first resident calls in a panic. They're not talking to the officer on the street. It's our communications people. And that's the same that's happening at the Consolidated Dispatch. If you call our 911, you will not know you're not getting Riverside. You would not know. It was a seamless transition from the public. You know, there was work that was done in the background, but you would never know when you pick up that phone that you're not calling our station here, that it's going to the 911 center, and that speaks volumes. So I give you your certificate and plaque, and I also have a watch. Your retirement. The village always gives a retirement watch, and this is your retirement watch that we got for you. And I really miss you, and I hope you nothing but the best. And everybody, and so before I'll ask them to come up if they want to address the board in a minute, and if their family members are here, maybe they can introduce their family members to the board. But before I do that, I asked Chief Buckley to come up because these employees worked with him also.
So as Chief Weitzel said, I cannot speak enough about these employees also. I have a pretty vast experience in dispatching, both police, fire, and EMS. I can honestly tell you that when we would have an incident here in town, I would call a dispatcher, tell them to get a pen out, because I would give them about 10 things I needed done, and I needed them all done right away. And they would do it. And I don't know how they would do it, because I would sit in the dispatch center sometimes and see how things would go on a daily basis. They answer the window. They answer all the phone lines. They answer the 911 phone calls. They answer the police radio, the fire radio, public works radio. And that's one person sitting there doing all that. So when people think that they just sit there and kick their feet up, that doesn't happen. They work hard. And every one of them here, and the ones that aren't here, all worked extremely hard. And whenever we asked them to do something, it was done. Like I said, I don't know how they got it done all the time, but they did. That just proves how good they were at doing their jobs. So thank you guys very much, and girls. And I still see them all the time, so that's a good thing. And Riverside was very lucky to have them as employees here. Thank you.
Michael, you never pick up.
I get to finally tell the chief something. Actually, I was tenured here for 29 years part-time.
That's right.
So I like to stand corrected with the chief, but seriously.
Well, you don't work for me now.
I know, I can do whatever I want. But seriously, village president, I've gone through more village administrations here than I've gone through fire chiefs or police chiefs. But for 29 years, I kept coming back, so that tells me something about the village in general. What a wonderful place to work for. I miss all the residents. They do still call sometimes up at the Dew Center. But seriously, it tells something about the village, about the employees that are here, regardless of the village administrations, but with police and fire, public works. It says something about this village. And for 29 years, I kept coming back, and I'm still coming back to the new center. It's not here at 31 or 27 Riverside Road, but it says something about the dedication of all the employees you have working for you. So I think that's a reflection on you, the chief of police, the fire chief, public works, Mr. Bailey, everyone. It's a reflection on this village. Everyone is one big family. So thanks for having me for 29 years. I appreciate it.
So Riverside was obviously my last job since I retired after 20 years here, and I've been doing this for 30 years. I kind of say that I saved the best for last, because when I came to Riverside, I felt like I found my home. I made a lot of good friends on the department, in the village, and other departments, and among the citizens. And I'm grateful for having been able to be here and meet all the people that I have. Thank you very much.
I am very happy I'm still with the village working here, and I thank our board and our chiefs, Chief Weitzel, Chief Buckley, our deputy chief, and our administration. I do miss dispatching and being in communications. I do miss that, but starting to get used to doing more with the administration, administrative work. But I do want to, as I said, thank everybody for that, the time, the 18 years of doing that, and then, with my future and doing this job also. I do appreciate it. I have my mom and my sister here, which glad they were able to make it, and my husband. So I want to thank everybody. Thank you.
That's all. They're going to, I have some, my administrative assistant has a little reception for them back at the police station, so they're going to go there unless the board had anything they wanted to say.
I guess I just would like to say one thing, and I'm really glad we have a lot of people here, and I hope a lot of people are at home watching. You know, we talk about our employees, but these are the faces of public servants. These are the people who answer us when we're afraid, who calm us down, who get us the help we need. I mean, these are the people that are the bedrock of our police and fire and public works departments. And I know that I speak for everybody up here when I say how much we appreciate your service, how much we appreciate your kindness and your affection for our town. I've known a lot of you a long time. And thank you for what you've done, and good luck and all the good things you're going to do in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks. They're the best. Next up is public comment. Would anyone like to address the board? Mr. Gallegos. He's got a real quick one. He needs to get out of here.
Good evening, Mr. President, trustees, those in attendance, and to those watching at home. Sir, I come before you in the village board to talk about July 28th, the second busiest day we'll have in town this summer. It begins with the Lions Club event, the Scout Cross Memorial Regatta. Paddlers will meet at McCormick Woods at 31st and 1st at 10 o'clock and probably be on the water around 10:30 or so. From there, we will circle around the 1st District and be in the Swan Ponds, Bean Bridge area around 11 o'clock. I would encourage as many spectators to be in their area, as it will certainly be for some great photography and videography. After that, all paddlers and spectators are invited to join us for rehydration and refreshments at La Barra. The second event of that day is from the Chamber of Commerce, and that's our annual Riverfest, our party in the park at Centennial. We will have 4 bands there. We will have bouncy houses for the kids, a ninja obstacle course will be available, as well as a climbing wall. Plenty of food from Choo Choo, La Barra, Aunt Diana's, so please no outside food or beverages. And that's all I have for that date. Thank you.
President Stiles, members of the board.
Excuse me, can we make sure we get names?
Yeah, we need names.
Oh, absolutely.
It just helps us because we've got emails from a lot of you all, and it's good to put a name with a face too, and it helps us say our minutes.
The next order of business was my name. I'm Peter Schoenman. I live at 235 Maplewood Road, and I thank you for hosting this public comment. So, as you're aware, there are many neighbors concerned about the Groveland Avenue levee project and the impacts that it will have on the community. Since the April 5th board meeting, where residents of Riverside were shown modeling for the proposed levee for the first time, we have been concerned. What we were shown was referred to as the 100-year flood, a regulatory term used to describe the 1% chance flood event. This is a term used to define also mandatory flood insurance for individual residential properties. At that meeting, Jeff Zerker of the United States Army Corps of Engineers stated, and I quote, "Even though the 2013 was a record, what we have modeled, this modeling, is to what's often known as the 100-year flood, or the 1% chance this flood would happen in any year. The 2013 flood did still not meet that stage, so it could still go higher," unquote. He also stated at the June 7th meeting that the standard we have to model to must meet regulations agreed upon by Burke Engineering, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and FEMA. So I think what was disturbing about that statement to many residents is that the core modeling for the 100-year flood did not match what was visually portrayed in the regulatory FEMA risk maps for the 100-year flood. At the June 7th, 2018 meeting, Mr. Zerker stated that the base flood elevation, or BFE, for their 100-year flood modeling was 615.3 NAVD 88.
Sorry.
That's fine. This was applied to all locations along the Des Plaines upstream and downstream from the project area, which is down here, to show that flooding would not increase because of the levee. However, the FEMA map contradicts this. It shows 616 NAVD 88 at a cross-section on the north end of Maplewood Road. It also shows the Des Plaines River directly connecting to the street of Maplewood. So we investigated further. In 2009, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources did a site-specific geotechnical survey for the Army Corps titled Groveland Avenue Limited Strategic Study. The survey data and modeling that resulted from the study became a material part of the Corps' proposal to obtain federal funding. Now we find the large discrepancy. DNR did not mark the 100-year flood at 615.3. They marked it over a foot higher. They marked it at 616.39 NAVD 88, to be exact. And this is from the proposal that the Army Corps sent to their division commander to obtain funding. So that's the geotechnical data that they sent. So using best practices we found for certified engineers and insurance professionals, the DNR appropriately marked their cross-section at the northwest corner of the proposed levee at river mile 46.07. Now, river mile, for those of you who don't know, is a geotechnical locator. Nothing more than that. It simply marks points along the river where they took survey data. And there are others here that you can barely see because we have a poor copy of the Groveland study. We found that the 2009 DNR survey was the most comprehensive survey ever performed for our section of the Des Plaines River at Riverside. It comprised 33 cross-sections of data from 31st Street to the Hoffman Dam. In contrast, the last physical survey of the river was performed in 1978 by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It had 5 cross-sections from 31st Street to the Hoffman Dam, and it is still being used today. To repeat, that's 5 cross-sections of geotechnical data versus 33 cross-sections for the most recent 2009 survey. In studying the DNR cross-sections, we failed to find 615.3 referenced anywhere near the project, so we decided to check the older 2008 flood insurance study. Here's what we found. So these are the effective cross-sections of the Des Plaines River, running, from 31st Street to the Hoffman Dam. There are 5 cross-sections. At the W cross-section, which is on the FEMA map, we plotted it up, and it seemed to arrive at 615.3. We thought, wow, that's quite a coincidence. Looking further in the FIS, as it's known, flood insurance study, we found a chart that verified, yes, at the W cross-section, 615.3, NAVD 88, for the elevation of the 100-year flood. So, to compare, why don't we show the, no. So we made a map to show what this actually means. This is DNR's cross-section, which was modeled specifically for the project in 2009 at RM 46.07, appropriately marked at the northwest portion of the project area. And here is the older W cross-section, which is at 615.3, and we think that that's what the Army Corps was using when they referred to their modeling as 100-year flood modeling. So why did the Corps model so low? Why are they not showing Riverside the factual base flood elevation conducted by the more recent 2009 DNR survey? We don't seem to have all the information. This is complicated and crucial for all of you to understand. How can the village base their decision on 40-year-old data that the Corps used for their modeling? Has the Army Corps presented the best, most accurate information to the village? We don't think so. We want the most accurate level of information, and we don't have it in the Corps' modeling. The fact is, the DNR's comprehensive survey, which was done expressly for the Groveland project, shows the base flood elevation as 1 foot higher than the Corps is presenting. If the village signs this agreement, FEMA will use all geotechnical information contained in the Groveland Avenue Limited Strategic Study. This will show FEMA that the water level for the 100-year flood is 1 foot higher than what the Corps has shown us. Again, let's let this sink in. The Army Corps is not giving us all of the information. The ramifications of signing an agreement based on inconsistent, outdated survey data would be far-reaching. By signing the agreement, the village of Riverside, in effect, is activating the base flood elevations in the DNR study. This would be a travesty. When that happens, all Riversiders will suffer. Not only will neighbors in Groveland still need to keep their insurance, their flood insurance, but neighbors whom had never been required to have flood insurance will be required to have flood insurance. I'd like to take this opportunity to advise the board and members of the community and the President to reject the modeling and information presented by the Army Corps of Engineers. I think we've discovered a huge modeling discrepancy. The geotechnical data does not add up. The consequences of signing this agreement in its current form would be dire. They are not giving us all of the information. We are all smarter than this. If I may paraphrase you, President Sells, after Mr. Zerker presented you a form of the proposal in 2013, you stated in the RB landmark, and I quote, "I can't imagine anyone signing this thing," unquote. President Sells, members of the board, I submit that we still do not know what the Army Corps means. In light of a 1 foot difference in the survey data presented to the village, it would be negligent to pursue a project partnership now or later. We are formally requesting that no action be taken concerning the Groveland Avenue levee project until such a time when greater transparency and clarity is revealed. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Monica Monaretto. I live at 217 Maplewood. And we brought some pictures for you. Two sets. There was talk that there was no water that reached homes. This is our visual evidence of this. Different people gave us photos. We'll leave them here so you can see them. They're labeled by address. Some of them are going to be hard to see for you across the room. You're going to have to come up close. Mainly, a lot of them are backyards. This property at 171, which is at the curve, the south curve of near the quote-unquote island, if anyone knows what I'm talking about. The water is clearly up into their outside porch area, and you could guess it's up to their house. Okay, there was talk that there was nothing, these would be the people backing up against that tie-in that's along Park Avenue. Okay, so that's that. We're kind of moving down from there, I'm sorry, I can't read upside down. So then this is the next house.
Put that on the table right there.
There you go. Okay, so then we kind of moved to the next house, which is 275 next door, clearly up to within a foot of their patio area. Houses then stacked. Their house is actually up above that area. So their house is not completely touched, but it's getting darn close. This is in between looking at this home, clearly around that island area. This is looking down the driveway to the island house. Next door to them, it's all the way up to their house. We don't know where this picture ends, probably somewhere around the garage. Then we move down to 212 Maplewood, which is about the middle of the straightaway on the block. Here's a look between that house and the house to the south. The water is actually higher, depicted here from a different year, sandbagging in between the homes. Here's another area behind the house. This is just a small one of that. This is also related to this. And this is in the backyard, sandbags. There's a few more on this one from that home. Talking to a reporter behind the house. They were filming because they had so much water back there. Similar.
I can't see. I'm not sure if it makes more sense maybe to put it somewhere like, I mean.
Well, I know, that's why I
Yeah.
put it up there.
This
I don't even
might be
mind,
helpful.
I don't even mind holding it, I can lift it. Okay, this is
that
very,
helpful to me?
this is very, very significant, these top two. Thank you. This is a picture of the bridge in 2013 that they said the water did not touch. This is not even at the 100-year flood mark. What happens when that water hits that bridge to Maplewood? Here it is present day. Big difference. And you can compare them, you can come up and see them. This is also 212, where we said we sandbagged between. This is the back of their house, sandbagging their back stairs, where the water was up against the house. Another push back several more inches. I don't think it's going to help. This is 190 back to the south. This set of taken from their home, looking down at the river. This is their backyard. This is pointing to the south home, which would be back where we showed the up against the house, which I believe is the village attorney's home. This is, then we switch gears. These photos are photos of rainwater. This is outside of 217. 230 is across, so the river's on the other side. It's hard to tell, but this whole side lot is filled with rainwater. This is the same area on those photos where the water would come through from the river. So we're adding now these two things together. I don't know if any studies have been done. To me, it seems like it's going to accelerate everything. This is the backyard. There's an area behind. This one. That's part of this area back that goes to the back of Woodside Homes. It's showing where the water goes. It's in the back. There's actually a stream of water. Every rainstorm comes through, goes around several garages. It's on back of Woodside and Maplewood. It goes into my neighbor's backyard and then gets pushed to the street from there. So now we're adding more water to this and then showing two more houses down. This actually, these two are looking to the south, or to the north from my yard. It's actually 2 yards, there's 2 fence rows, completely flooded. His shed completely surrounded. These are regular events. I have seen ducks make their nests back here, and then only to find out it goes away. So this has been going on as long as I've lived here. This has gotten worse over time. I don't know if there were building projects or what, but now we have to think about adding all this rainwater. I think it's a very important consideration. Maybe there's a formula, I don't know, but nobody's talked about it, so I would like to hear about that. So here's your visual evidence that we've collected so far. There actually are a couple little videos, but we couldn't figure out how to bring them. So if you want to see them, we'll show them to you.
Hi, my name is Anna Montes, and I live at 212 Maplewood. And the reason I feel it's important for me to speak is, one, I owe people a debt of thanks from 2008 when you came to sandbag my home, and I was literally being taken to the hospital, and my husband was out of town. So whoever sandbagged my home, thank you very much. You're welcome. This is my house. I just want to point out, when you see this view, and this is the view from my backyard. So this is the forest preserve on the other side. My home is 3 feet above the river at that point in time. So you go to my home right now, the river, there's a wall, and the river is about 4 feet below that right now. But this is 3 feet above the wall in my backyard. So it's not just 3 feet, it's like 9 feet from where it is now. So I think it's important, because you've said that you don't know that we've experienced it. If you look at these other maps that have, you'll see the 2 red dots in some of the maps, and then you'll see that one map that the river cuts through. River cuts through one house north of me. But the map that has 2 different dots, that's my property. So you're seeing, this is my garage, and this is my home, and this is the river cutting through between the 2. And this has happened both floods. The biggest problem we've had, outside the obvious flood, is that the decisions are always reached on the area south of us. And my heart breaks for everyone that's in the Groveland area. My heart really does break for you. But what happens is things occur because everyone wants to only look at this area. I have worked with multi-billion-dollar projects and hundreds of million-dollar projects when I've seen decisions forced to get the best BCR. I've seen it time and time again. Then we go to post-appraisal. I have sat there with a global board of directors saying, how did we make this stupid decision? And we make it because at the time, we want to take care of one thing, and we never look at the other implications. One of the biggest impacts we had in that flood, when I was in the hospital, was to protect everyone, we turned off the power to our section of town. Yeah. And then we flooded up into our basements. And we literally had to beg the town to please turn the power back on. Yeah. And so what we're just trying to say is, while you're considering everyone here, please consider us. And what I'm not clear of, it still is unclear to me, and I thought Peter did a great job, is how can we get this data to you in a way, and how can we get a response from you on the data that's being used and you're going to use to make your decisions to move forward? Because this is not the first time around. 5 years ago, we were in the same place, and we've been working at this, and to be honest, we're not getting clear responses. So that's my question to you. What more data do you need? How are you going to look at this data? And what can we do to make sure that we're making the right decisions for all the citizens of this town, and not to push a BCR in the way we want it to do? Because there's going to be unintended consequences if we do that. And these homes on Maplewood are some of those consequences. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you for letting me speak. Members of the board, President Sells, my name is Stephen O'Donnell. I live at 510 Berkeley Road with my wife Megan. We lived in Riverside very happily for 2 years. We love the town, we love the people, really everything about it. It's a very appealing place to live. Unfortunately, last month, we were victims of a home invasion, a break-in while we were home on a Sunday. Something that, I hope never happens to any of you. It's a very scary thing. At 8 a.m. on a Sunday, you're in bed, the doorbell rings, you think it's Amazon delivering a package. Shortly thereafter, we hear loud noises. Our side door has been smashed through, broken into, while we're in the house. I mean, we're in bed. Fortunately, we were able to scare off whoever it was. I did not see the people. They quickly fled and left. But it's obviously a very scary thing to have happen. And the key is, we saw they pulled across our neighbor's yard and quickly were able to escape down Harlem Avenue. And the reason why I'm here today is to bring up a point that, Riverside, while being a very safe community, we have to be careful about our entrances and exits to this town. Berkeley, for those of you that don't know where we live, is the furthest northeast corner of town, directly south of the 7-Eleven, right by the tracks. It is the first entrance into Riverside. Not Long Common, Berkeley, which we feel is unnecessary for many reasons. It's a residential street. It should not be a through street. It invites this sort of thing, because this is a crime of opportunity. Whoever did this knows that they could easily get in and get out. It's not a street that's going to be, widely thought of, or, it's not a main street. And we want to, on behalf of the people, and we spoke with all of our neighbors, they're very much on board with us bringing forward the idea of potentially looking into closing off that entrance. And also, the northeast corner of Riverside really deserves a nice grand entrance into the town. Because as of right now, we just have, failed businesses, and I know that we have that strip mall there that has cleaned itself up a bit, but still, we have vacant lots there. We've recently had graffiti on the building there. We have people coming through our street that often don't belong. We've, snooping around everything left and right. And I urge the board to consider this, because this could happen to any of us, and, by controlling the amount, where people can enter and exit our town is important, and it's something that we should all consider, because this is real, this really happened, and I don't want it to happen again. So thank you.
I said this in an email to you. I mean, I just want to commend you on your bravery and your quick action on that morning. If you had not responded the way that you did, things might have been much worse. So
I want to thank all of the police for their quick response. They were both North Riverside and Riverside responded incredibly quickly. They were here very fast, but we're looking to obviously prevent these things from being able to happen in the future. And so I urge the board to consider it. We're more than willing to assist in if there's a quoting process, to look into potential options, things like that. We're more than willing to be active and participate, as well as all of our neighbors on the block that we've spoken to. They're all on board with this as well.
Thank you.
None of us need that entrance.
Thank you for bringing this to us.
problem.
We appreciate it, Stephen. Anyone else? Please.
My name is Steve Campbell. I live at 372 Fairbank. But there is something that troubles me deeply about the flood wall project, and that is the village ordered and received a high-density LiDAR study that was 20 points per meter with a 2-inch vertical accuracy. And since we've heard from the Corps and from the village engineers that the level 3 that's available is only good to 2.5 feet, that seems to me to be a little odd that we have purchased the data and should have it. That will show the exact elevations, and it will be quite easy to determine where the water flowed and what the elevations were. So I don't know if the village doesn't have the information or whether the village doesn't remember that they bought it, but either way, it appears that the village spent almost $30,000, which was about $2,000 less than the actual contract for this high-density LiDAR. And at 20 points per meter, there's a standard, and it's 5 centimeters, which is just slightly under 2 inches vertical accuracy. So if the village has that data, it would seem that since one of the primary concerns was to get it to detect drainage issues when homeowners changed the grade of their property, that learning the grade of one's property as it is with relating to flooding would be all important. And since it seems that the water's coming in up north on Maplewood, north of where the project's actually going to be, that the water's still going to flow south and it's still going to fill up the bowl that is Groveland, and there's never been overland flow come in over the berm since it was rebuilt. So that just concerns me that the village appears to have purchased the product, but has not made that available to the residents at large that are very concerned about the flood wall. And aside from the free board that they have to have for certification, it sounds kind of like a couple of high school boys with a science project that has to meet a certain level of credibility. And it's not going to take anybody out of the floodplain. And I'm sympathetic with the people that flood. I've had 2 feet of water running down Fairbank. My property's in the floodplain, although not the structure. You can have it removed if it's a foot over the high flood elevation. At the lowest point, the water can flow in. But the flood wall is not going to do anything to help the river level and nothing to help the people get off the floodplain map. So what's the net result? And there's still the question of the 2 items in the estimate about the $500,000 for use and damage and $1 million for relocation. If they said they don't know where it's going to be, how can they figure out they're going to have to use $1.5 million to pay for stuff? So it's just very questionable. Clearly, the residents don't have all of the information, certainly not all the information that the village allegedly has purchased and actually has ownership of, full ownership of the data. It's not on a use basis, it belongs to them. And there's digital elevation maps and digital terrain maps. And the map that's on the interactive map on the web page is supposedly the LiDAR data, and it shows contours, but there's no elevations. So there's all the little lines, but you don't know how much the elevation changes. So at a minimum, I think that things should be delayed so this can be more fully investigated, because the information hasn't been given to us. Information that we, the residents, have paid for. It came out of the general fund. So, and I think in terms of tonight with the garage, with the driveway thing, that's a zoning change that affects potentially every single-family residential home with a driveway in the village. And there was really no major effort made to notify the population of the village. Of course it was published in the paper, but not everybody reads the landmark. And the private individuals that ask for entitlements, including changes to the zoning code, have to mail letters to people within 250 feet. So if every residential structure that's single family in the town could be affected, then they should all get notice. And the same thing with making vacation rentals a right of use in a residential district. That affects every home, because there could be a vacation rental right next door. And the people of the village should have had full notice of that. And I've been through major zoning change rewrites in other villages, and they send letters out to the entire zoning district. So it does seem that the process needs a little tweaking to be a little more open and transparent, and the data that the village has purchased should be made available freely to the residents. So thank you for listening. That's just, I think, shortfalls in process. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Flaherty. I live at 215 Maplewood. Very quick comment. I think based on the data that was presented tonight, we're asking the village board to delay any kind of vote on this measure. I know it's everyone in the previous meetings has been like, well, we can go to this next phase and it won't, it's not saying that we're going to do this. It's just now we'll get extra money to study further. I think there's been so many discrepancies. I feel it very, very hard to believe that any more study is going to make any more difference to this. I mean, the data is pretty conclusive that Peter presented tonight. So I would hope that the village would take some time, delay it. There's no reason to vote on it tonight. I think more time needs to be spent, and I don't think we need to take any action tonight. So thank you very much.
I'm Colleen Toriumi. I live at 211 Maplewood. And I just want you guys to recall that in April of, I think it was April 7th or April 5th, when we first heard of the project again this year, that when Jeff Zucher made the presentation, he showed us the model and he explained to us that the model was configured with not taking into account any rain event. It was basically a rain-free flood. It was only flood water. And so he had also said at the April meeting that none of the houses on Maplewood had flood water come up to their house. And you can see very clearly from our photographic evidence that that is just simply not the case. He also said that flood water never touches the street, and there are samples of that as well. The other thing he said was that flood water never went to the bottom of the bridge here. And clearly it did. So I join my fellow neighbors and ask that you would take a pause, that you would look at the information that Peter has presented, the 1 foot discrepancy in the measurements that were presented from the Army Corps and the measurements that the DNR took that were much more accurate and much more recent. So I would just ask that you would, before moving forward, that you would take a look at our photographic evidence and that you would also look at Peter's. Thank you.
We have a very extensive, is it very short, sir? Can you make it really short? Yeah, okay. And then we're going to move on to the rest of our agenda here.
Lad Kohanek, 99 Groveland. I'm not really sure what the concern is of the Maplewood residents with relationship to this berm extension. With the volume of rain that comes down in these large storms, the area that gets flooded in Riverside on Groveland and Lincoln is a drop in the bucket. I can't believe that people believe that this small area, which is a depression in Riverside, is going to affect the trillions of gallons that come down in these rainstorms. I've lived at this location. My parents owned the building since '67. I'm very familiar with all the rainstorms. I know that to cite the level of the height of the flood, you can take it off of our berm. Our berm is never breached. So you can take measurements off of that, but I can't see that a few blocks is going to make a big deal to the rest of this Illinois flood situation, because across the street you have the Forest Preserve. It's going to go that way. if the elevation of the river goes up 1 millimeter, I'd be surprised at that. Thank you.
Reports of village offices. First up is my report. The only thing I have this evening is an ordinance authorizing the issuance of a Class A1 liquor license, and this is for PM Petroleum. This is subsequent to an application by Pangjad Kapadas. He is in negotiations to purchase the Citgo gas station at 539 Long Common Road. However, the sale is contingent upon his ability to secure a liquor license for the premises, and this license would be for the sale of beer, wine, and alcoholic beverages in sealed packages for consumption off premises. The existing business now does not have a liquor license. The applicants have submitted almost all of the required documents, as well as being fingerprinted, and our police department is conducting a background investigation. So this motion to approve the license is, of course, contingent upon them submitting all of the subsequent documentation and passing all of the required background checks by our police department. So I would ask for a motion and a second to approve an ordinance issuing a Class A1 liquor license to PM Petroleum LLC. By Mr. Ballerine. By Mr. Pollack. Any questions? Please call the roll. Yes.
Do they still have any code violations?
This is a different.
Oh, it's a different one? Oh, I'm sorry.
This is a new buyer.
No, but I mean the facility itself right now.
My understanding is those violations have been cleared.
Are there existing code violations?
Director App.
I know it's a new buyer.
Yeah.
They have corrected all of the violations. We are just awaiting for them to pay off their fines that they had, and I believe they're planning on doing that contingent on the sale. So it'll be paid before the property will change hands, but they haven't made that payment just yet. So.
Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollack.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sedovich.
Aye.
Trustee Peters. Aye.
Motion carries. That's all I have. Manager Francis.
I have one update for residents. Some will notice that we are starting to do our installation of our thermoplastic markings throughout the village. You will note that there are stop sign bars that are also being installed at designated locations where we've discussed over the past year of installing new stop signs. We will send out an e-flash tomorrow with those various locations. Also, the new stop signs will be noted with various flags on them so that residents are aware of them. Probably the most visible one that you will see is right outside our building, which is 27 Riverside Road, which is the intersection of Riverside Road and Burling. You'll notice that there is a line already on the pavement. The stop sign will be installed by the end of next week. But like I said, we will be sending out an e-flash tomorrow with a map so that residents are aware, in addition to posting on social media. So that is all I have.
Thank you. Next up is the approval of the consent agenda, and as always, I blame Attorney Mars that I have to read all of this. So the consent agenda for this evening is to ratify the voucher list of bills July 5th, 2018, approve the voucher list of bills July 19, 2018, approve the Village Board of Trustees regular meeting minutes June 21st, 2018, file and review the following: the Landscape Advisory Commission meeting minutes of May 8th, Landscape Advisory Commission meeting minutes of June 12th, Historical Commission meeting minutes of May 21st, the Finance Department monthly report for June 2018, the Fire Department monthly report for June 2018, and the Police Department monthly report June of 18th. Also, a motion to approve the special event application for Corey's Kids Triathlon, which is to be held on Saturday, August 11th. Please note that it's August 11th for Corey's Kids Triathlon, not the 18th. A resolution approving the Illinois Department of Transportation's local agency agreement for federal participation with the Village of Riverside for improvements to Berry Point Road, Forest Avenue, and Herrick Road. A resolution authorizing the village manager to execute an agreement in the amount of $62,260.75 with Thomas Engineering Group for the Surface Transportation Program resurfacing of Berry Point Road and Forest Avenue project with a portion of Herrick Road also utilizing MFT funds. Excuse me. A resolution approving the Illinois Department of Transportation's local agency agreement for federal participation with the Village of Riverside for the Metro Station Area Pedestrian Access Improvement Project. A resolution awarding a bid in the amount of $356,855 to Martum Construction Company for the Train Depot Platform Rehabilitation Project, and authorizing the village manager to execute a construction agreement. A resolution authorizing change order number 1 to the station platform rehabilitation project, changing the scope of work and reducing the project cost from $356,855 to $274,439.50. A resolution authorizing the village manager to execute an agreement in the amount of $132,600 with Christopher B. Burke Engineering for professional engineering services for the commuter lot number 1 green parking lot project. A resolution authorizing the expenditure of motor fuel tax funds in the amount of $170,000 for the Blooming Bank Road and Riverside Road Metro Station Area Pedestrian Access Improvement Project. And lastly, a resolution authorizing the expenditure of motor fuel tax funds in the amount of $430,000 for the Berry Point Road, Forest Avenue, and Herrick Road Street improvement projects. Does anyone need anything removed for further discussion? Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
By Mr. Giza.
Second.
Second by Ms. Peters. Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sudby.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. And just an addendum, last week we received a very gracious phone call from President Spiropoulos from the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District confirming our receipt for our green parking lot of a grant from MWRD of $560,000 to go toward the construction of the sustainable green parking lot. So we are very grateful to the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District and to the generosity of the phone call, which is a very gracious thing for President Spiropoulos to do. Moving on to reports of departments, commissions, and trustee liaisons. Any reports? Hearing none, we'll move on to ordinances and resolutions. First up is an ordinance authorizing renewal of aggregation program for electrical load. Manager Francis.
Thank you. As you recall, the village did a referendum in 2012 with the question establishing a municipal aggregation program. Since that time, we've renewed our aggregation program, most recently with Dynegy Energy, and that's set to expire in October of this year. Since the time of we've started with the renewal energy program, we've reduced our CO2 emissions by 83,000 tons. We have representatives here this evening from NIMEC to outline the bids that were received. Each board member received a copy of that at their seat. She will go through the two different options for the board, whether it is the standard aggregation or the 100% green community aggregation program. Sharon?
Thank you, Jessica.
Could we have quiet, please?
Thanks, President. Sharon Durling with the Northern Illinois Municipal Electric Collaborative went out to bid again and received some competitive bids to renew your electric aggregation program. The lowest bidder for the standard aggregations, as you see, is Constellation. Kind of surprised me. We've done probably 100 bids since we've engaged a contract with Constellation. I called them today. They said they've changed their pricing model a little bit. Guess we don't care what they've done with their pricing model, but the fact that they've tightened up their bid is surprising to me, and that's fine. But they presented the lowest bid. Your current supplier is Dynegy Energy. We presented traditional pricing, you might call that brown pricing, short term, and 100% renewable pricing, which is what you currently have in your current program. So we have a few options here. There's always the option, and I said to Jessica earlier today, of suspending the program, that's an outstanding option, of renewing in a standard aggregation program, and the lowest bidder for a one-year term is Constellation at 7.745 cents per kilowatt hour. That brings us to the question of how does that compare with the ComEd rate? The annualized ComEd rate is currently 7.75 cents per kilowatt hour, and you may recall they offer by state law 14.5% renewable energy the price I quoted from Constellation for 1 year is 100% renewable energy credits. We got indicative bids about a month ago just to see what we'd have in play for Riverside, and the bids were much higher, so I'm surprised that they're as competitive as they are. Because they were higher, I presented to Jessica a new 100% green community aggregation program that we're offering, and I can go into a little bit of detail about that. I think you might have a memo on that. There's a supplier, MC Squared, that has developed a new program. About 7 communities have contracted to do that in the last month or so. They will offer every ratepayer in the community would be paying the ComEd rate to compare. The ComEd rate, as you might recall, adjusts a little bit every month, and it would be exactly to the penny, the ComEd rate. And then they would provide 100% renewable energy, green energy, even for the folks that opted out, folks that didn't want to be in the program, energy, green energy for the entire community. I can go into that in a little bit more detail or not, but how they're able to do that is some of the residents would be moved to ComEd supply service because every meter is a different cost. Some ratepayers consume a lot of energy at real high demand, and that's very costly. You might say they're 12 cents per kilowatt hour. Some meters are much lower cost, maybe 6 cents per kilowatt hour. So the high cost, they would move to ComEd service, and they would serve roughly 50% of the residents at MC Squared, and then they would purchase renewable energy credits for the whole community. So essentially 3, suspend the program, continue with a program similar to you currently have, or look at the 100% green. I'm happy to take questions. I'll just keep it brief.
I guess, what are we voting on?
We're picking one of these.
Which company we want to do, or whether we default back
Oh,
to
so
ComEd.
okay, this is part of our supplemental package? That's why I don't know what we're talking about. Sorry, okay, thank you. I didn't have this in front of me.
In reviewing this and given the challenge that we have every time we change companies with aggregation, given that Constellation has come in essentially at the ComEd rate, slightly less, I would recommend their 12 months, simply for the fact if we go with this 100% green community aggregation, I think there's going to be a lot of confusion. Because people will be shifted and moved around based on their consumption, and that's what Sharon was touching upon when she said that each meter is kind of a different price because it's based on their consumption when they consume at different hours of the day and things of that sort. And I think for staff, because usually we're the ones that are handling a lot of these questions, that can create a lot of confusion amongst residents. Plus we have a lot of companies that try to get residents to move too. So I think going with one company for either residents to opt in or opt out of the program, and given that it's less than ComEd, hopefully most of our residents would opt into the program. I think it makes it easier from an efficiency standpoint. So.
Can you just give me the difference between 7.45 and 7.75 for the average home over, I mean, I think it's pennies, right?
1 cent probably. It's a 7.745, so that's 5 1/1000ths of a penny per kilowatt hour. That might be 5 cents a year, so it's essentially even.
Right, so we're splitting dimes.
But you have the renewable energy.
Exactly. Well, why would we not stay with Dynagy Energy, because that's who we're with now? Wouldn't that be the simplest to do?
It would be simple, and their rate's a little bit higher. They're bidding 7.85 cents per kilowatt hour. That's 1/10 of a penny higher, and that's certainly an option. There's no, to my understanding, need to take the lowest pricing if the difference might be worth staying with the same supplier, and the monetary difference would be really small. We may calculate quickly, off the top of my head, what that would be for the average ratepayer, 8,000 kilowatt hours per year. $8 a year would be about the difference.
Or we can go to a 24-month too.
Exactly. And you'll notice in the 24 months, I think that might be advisable. I mean, if you're asked my opinion, which you didn't exactly, but might be advisable. But we do have some information about what's going to happen in year 2. You'll notice that price goes down a little bit from year 1 to year 2, and that's because there's a portion of the supply that's previously known. It's previously set 3 years in advance by regulators. And you'll see Dynegy Energy knows that. MC Squared, the price also declines a little bit. So they price that in, which means next year, maybe you could get a little bit more lower pricing, a tenth of a penny, incrementally lower, all things being equal. But 2-year term, it's a little bit longer. Wouldn't advise against it. It's
And there's no cancellation, so if we could always,
can
always leave.
That's right, trustee.
We
Yes.
could always leave at the end of a year if we,
Correct.
So I would say the best thing to do is take the lowest rate we can and reevaluate it in a year if we have to.
Would you like to make that a motion?
I would make a motion that we stay with Dynegy Energy for a 24-month period at 7.719, 100% green.
A motion from Mr. Conley.
Second.
By Mr. Wilson, Mr. Paul.
Why not 3 years?
That's what I was going to say.
It's even cheaper.
Okay.
Jumping.
Sure.
there's no
I'll
better.
comment on that. It's a little bit less conservative because who knows where electric power is going to go. The economy's kind of strong. Could it go up? And my crystal ball gets really fuzzy 3 years out. And that's perfectly fine if the village chooses to. It's a little bit higher risk because it's a little bit longer term. And you can see the pickup from 7.719 to 7.671 is even incrementally smaller. So certainly valid question.
If we could cancel.
Yes, you can't cancel the contract. Residents would individually have to pick up the phone and do it. So would probably have to put out like an e-flash and say, everybody call and cancel. It's a little bit of an onerous, but folks can do it.
Given the history of these rates, I mean, would it take a dramatic change in the history of these rates to really have a big impact if we committed to 3 years?
There has been dramatic changes. In 2016, the ComEd rate dropped unexpectedly. And so there were a lot of, the Crane's article talked about a lot of communities that were upside down. Your community did well, but some were, so actually the commodity can get pretty dicey. I think it was due to fracking technologies. It just drove the price lower, so caught some folks. I can't see the picture, but that was a tough time.
Other thoughts? So the motion as it stands is for 2 years. Do I hear a motion to amend to 3 or? Okay. Any further comment?
I'll make a motion to amend it to 3 years.
I'll second that.
By Mr. Gisa.
So you said each resident is going to have to call in if we want to cancel.
That is correct.
Okay.
So if it goes, let's say, upside down,
Right.
I wouldn't say there'd be bloodshed at City Hall or Village Hall. It might be some unhappy people, and then you say, go ahead, you can make one phone call and opt out of the program for no fee.
And then we would have to come back to the table and figure out.
The contract would still be in play for the full 36 months. The village couldn't cancel the contract. But individuals can, it's all about customer choice. They can do whatever they want anytime. The contract would stay in play 36 months. You can't get out of that.
I would think if we saw that, we would send an e-flash and inform residents that this is happening and they have this option.
I mean, the only potential difficulty I see with that is not everybody has e-flash. And in order to successfully do it, you'd have to pretty much reach every consumer. And I'm not quite sure how we would do that, other than like every door direct or, I mean, it would be difficult to reach every single.
We kind of advise, because of what happened in 2016, keeping a shorter leash on the term, but that's just a comment from me.
But I also think that if a supplier was more aggressive in pricing, they'd probably also be aggressive with the residents. There'd probably be a mailer or something, and I'm sure they'd make it real clear on how to make the switch themselves. So
The supplier would be compelled to keep the prefer folks don't leave.
I'm sorry?
The supplier would be compelled to retain the resident's business, so they would not be likely to put out a notice suggesting folks call to cancel. They wouldn't be.
No, but a competing supplier would. I think,
yes.
I know we always get letters. from-
Yes, and I'd love to make a comment about that if I may. There are many competing suppliers in Illinois, probably 50 to 60. A Chicago Cranes business article 1 year ago reported an Illinois Commerce Commission study. Illinois Commerce Commission, their job is to protect consumers. Their study revealed that the average ratepayer who had gone out on their own to one of these solicitors that came in was paying 24% above the ComEd rate, which is one reason your village works hard. So I'm going to use the word nefarious. There are some nefarious players out there that are aggressive. So yes, they might offer something, and we see a lot of those, start the first month at 5 cents, and then it floats.
Yeah.
We've seen 20 cents, 30 cents. So there's that.
So the question before you now, first is the amendment as to whether you want to modify Mr. Valerie's motion from a 2-year to a 3-year. So please call the roll on the question of whether on the amendment only.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Nay.
Trustee Valerie.
No.
Trustee Sedovy.
Aye.
Trustee Peters. No.
I get to do it? No. So now we're back to the motion to sign up with Dynegy Energy for a 2-year term. Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sedovy.
Aye.
Trustee Peters. Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. It's always good to see you. Next up is a resolution authorizing the village manager to execute the non-federal sponsor's self-certification of financial capability for agreements relative to the Groveland Avenue levy project. Manager Francis.
Thank you. If the board chooses to move forward with review of the project partnership agreement with Army Corps of Engineers, this form is required. They've asked for it on a number of occasions. However, in consulting with our village attorney, I think it's in the best interest that the board take action prior to me signing off on anything. It in no way obligates the village to move forward with the project. However, in order for them to do a higher level review and to work with Attorney Mars and Attorney Molina on the project partnership agreement, they do need this. So the item for the board to review and discuss and potentially approve is this resolution authorizing me to approve this non-federal sponsors certification financial capability.
So I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve the resolution. Mr. Powell?
Motion to approve the resolution as presented.
Second. Second. By Mr. Sedovy. Further discussion? Powell?
I've just asked the village staff to make sure that the information provided tonight is fully vetted and that we're provided with information about that and how this may or may not affect this program.
I have a question, Jessica. The information provided tonight, the consistent message was inconsistent information or delays. If we were to delay this in order to gather more data and provide that to the residents, what is that? How does that affect the opportunity?
So the LiDAR data that was mentioned is on our village website, and I will make sure, I will work with village staff to make sure that there's a link on the Groveland site. We've received some emails, so we have some email addresses from various individuals that have reached out to village staff, so we'll compile that to try to facilitate additional communication. We do try to push everything out on social media and on our e-flash system, but that's not to say that we can't do a better job of communicating some of these things. I spoke with a couple of residents this past week, and one of them had suggested a timeline, which staff absolutely can put together, but we can't put hard dates. So an example of this is the project partnership agreement. Well, we need this piece in order to even start discussing this for our village attorney to even begin reviewing this. So, and that takes at least 35 days for this piece to basically be forwarded through the Army Corps of Engineers. So to say I know when the project partnership agreement will be on the next agenda, I don't, but what I can do is come up with a tentative timeline and give broad date ranges, and then once it becomes closer and we actually know what agendas they'll be on, we can update those accordingly. But as much data as we have, we've been trying to push out to residents. So as much as we try to figure out different mediums to reach out to residents, unfortunately, it seems as though not all of the information is getting out, or some of it, and so coming up with another methodology of better communication, I'm absolutely open to.
And so to be clear, this document is only necessary for the Army Corps to do their higher level review of the project, the partnership agreement, and to work with our attorneys. This does not approve the partnership agreement.
Right.
Nor does it, certainly, it does not have anything to do with the final approval of a construction project.
The legal eagles are seeing if we can either work together. We need to work with Jeff and look at this information and vet through it.
And that's what this will allow.
Well received, so.
That's what this would allow, yes. Did you have another question, Mr. Clark?
That's my question. I just wanted to be clear that what this does commit us to do, which is very little, right?
It doesn't commit us to anything.
Right.
Right. Further questions? Please call the roll. Oh, yes.
Can I make a comment, please?
Sure.
I wanted to refrain from making this analogy. But, you know, what we have here, we're trying to be sold on something. For example, if you went to a used car dealership, the car dealer might tell you that the car is certified, it meets the standards for this and that, but then you go ahead and do your own due diligence because you're a smart shopper. And then you find that, in fact, this car has been in a terrible accident. Maybe it was even flooded. Who knows? Maybe it's got a recalled engine. Who knows? Why would you then go back to the dealer and say, yeah, you tried to get me on that one, but I guess I'll sign the next step in the paperwork so maybe you can give me a better deal? Why, who in their good sense would do something like that? And that's all I want to say. Actually, I do want to say one more thing. Attorney Mars, you live on our block. You're a neighbor of ours. When we started talking about this, neighbors getting together, Mike graciously bowed out. He told one of our neighbors that it would be a conflict of interest for him to participate. Well, I can't see how it wouldn't be a conflict of interest for you to advise the board on such an important matter. If you can't be with us, how can you be with the rest of the Riverside community? I'm just wondering if you had thought about recusing yourself from the proceedings, or if anyone else had. Thank you.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Fiedler.
Nay.
Trustee Longstone.
Aye.
Trustee Ballard.
Aye.
Trustee Sedley.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up is a resolution approving membership of the Village of Riverside in the West Suburban Special Recreation Association, WSSRA. Ron?
Good evening. President Sells, Village Board of Trustees, Village Manager Francis. Before you is a resolution to approve membership of the Village of Riverside in the West Suburban Special Recreation Association. Since March 1st, 2018, Village of Riverside Board of Trustees meeting, Parks and Recreation staff, along with Executive Director Mary Ann Burko of WSSRA, who couldn't be here tonight, we've been working diligently to complete the admittance process for the village. The village request was submitted to the WSSRA board, who then conducted a feasibility study in conjunction with their finance committee. They then discussed the partnership at their April board meeting, and then formal action occurred at their June 12th, 2018 board meeting. With myself in attendance, the WSSRA board voted unanimously in favor of the partnership between the Village of Riverside and the West Suburban Special Recreation Association. We've already established a fantastic working relationship. In fact, Executive Director Burko has expedited the process for us, and they have already submitted some advertisement with us as members based on the work we've done so far and the commitment of the board. The next step in the partnership timeline for the village board is to accept and sign the articles of agreement and the resolution. Residents will be eligible to register for programs in August and with participation beginning in September based on this timeline and this step. If you have any questions, I can answer those.
Hearing none, I ask for a motion and a second to approve the resolution. So, by Mr. Valerie. Second. By Mr. Gisa. Please call the roll.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Gisa.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Sedgwick.
Aye.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, Director Manchiotti. There's been a request, since we're on this subject with regard to the WSSRA, I'm going to move up under considerations. We have an item under considerations regarding a discussion of the funding for the WSSR membership. So Manager Francis, would you like to lead us through that?
Certainly. So the board has now approved for the Village of Riverside to become a member of WESRA. Provided previously was the estimated share payment schedule that's also included on the agenda history sheet for the funding discussion. You will notice that there are a couple of different options. The option one is to have a special recreation association levy, which is outlined within the agenda history sheet, and the potential impact. That is not part of the village's aggregate tax levy, so it would be separate and aside. It would be distinctly only utilized for the special recreation purposes and inclusion costs. The other option is reallocation of general fund expenditures that would potentially require a budget amendment with regard to that. So staff needs guidance with regard to this, as this was an unanticipated expenditure for fiscal year 2018, and then also for planning purposes for fiscal year 2019.
And just to add to that, in any event, the next two quarterly payments will have to come out of the general fund. So if the board was to decide to move forward with the tax levy, that would give staff the opportunity to calculate not only the inclusion cost, but also find a way to recoup the initial two payments, initial two quarterly payments. So that's another aspect of this. So that's the question, whether we want to direct staff to do those calculations and come up with something hard and fast that you can actually see all the numbers, and then this is not a vote on whether to have the tax. It's a vote on to direct staff to do that work to present the tax possibility to you. Yes, sir.
That's fantastic. I would also like Ron to make sure that he calculates any inclusion costs that the rec department would incur in order to have some children that want to stay in town or go to the summer camps here, include that cost also.
So do I hear consensus then to direct staff to proceed? Yes. Okay, thank you. Going back now to the agenda. Next up is an ordinance amending the Village of Riverside Village Code and zoning ordinance relative to garages and driveways.
I'd kind of like to ask first if we can, as a board, push this until September 6th to do a little bit more follow-up on what Mr. Campbell had to say about whether or not we provided proper notification. I received several calls in regards to this one with some frustrations as well. And so I need more time as well to drill through it. And I think some of our residents would like some more time to look at how it implicates them and their properties. So I would like to ask this on the board to push this decision and discussion until September 6th to allow that time, 6 weeks.
Any problem with that? Mr. Powell?
I had no problem tabling it if trustees need more time to review it, but I'm sure that the proper legal notice was done. The legal notice that Mr. Campbell referenced is not required for this type of action.
I certainly have no objection to waiting until September, but this has been an ongoing conversation for months and months. So, at some point, you can only do so much in terms of trying to notify people. So, but yeah.
Can we be clear what we're continuing it to? I think we
September.
have September.
Well, there hasn't been a motion, so there doesn't have to be an actual
Making a
motion.
motion to extend this or push it till September 6th board.
Do we even need a?
Right, you don't need a date certain, you can just.
Okay, so we'll put it on September 6th.
Would I be able to ask a question, just for clarity's sake?
Sure. Yeah.
If somebody has a driveway that this particular ordinance now makes non-conforming, and that driveway is made of cement, and it deteriorates to a certain degree that it needs to be replaced, can they replace that driveway in kind, so they don't have to then narrow it down? They can put exactly what they have back.
Yes, we do have a section in our non-conforming chapter of the zoning ordinance specifically for driveways, and it's written such that the non-conforming driveways are considered a non-conforming use, and so you're allowed to maintain and repair it. So any sort of in-kind replacement and repair, it can happen in place. You can't widen it, you can't kind of change the configuration of it, but you can continue to have that driveway, in that once you start changing materials or size, then you have to start bringing it into conformance.
It would be listed as a non-conformance when the house is sold.
Exactly, it would be listed as a
So
non-conformance.
this impacts a whole bunch of people's properties existing, is where the big crutch of the problem is, at least the way it was explained to me. So that's what I want to really drill into. Had we excluded existing homes, we wouldn't have a problem, and we'd be able to focus our energy on the new homes. But since this document identified that they were going to deal with existing homes, now there's quite a few people that feel that they're being discriminated against unfairly. And so I would like time to research that and understand it better with those residents. They deserve that.
But did you get your question?
Well, my other question is the other part of that is if somebody wanted to take a concrete driveway and replace it with pavers, which is something that we would encourage, can they do that, or is that not considered a like kind?
That's not considered like kind. So if they were to switch to pavers, then that new driveway would have to meet the new standard for driveways.
So instead of people doing
the good thing,
impervious pavers that we like to do to help our water problem, this forces them to do concrete in a smaller area with a higher impervious position.
I doubt seriously if there's anybody up here that wants to give an incentive to do that. To force them to use concrete.
We don't, but that's what we're doing here, originally. So, okay, we just need more time. There's a lot of good stuff in here. I don't want to say that, but I think that we need to do better, and I think we can.
One last comment. I do hope that we can wrap this up at meeting in September, because there's an urgency to this.
Everybody knows, you want to do research, we got till September 6th.
Could I ask, though, for a clarification on precedent? My recollection from this board and previous boards is we've always honored any trustee's request to table a matter, but not 3 meetings.
Right.
I mean, can I come on a matter later and say, I want to table this till 2019? I mean, what's reasonable, though?
I think.
We think 6 weeks is reasonable?
That's why that long?
Yeah, to me, that's excessive.
I guess, I'll ask Manager Francis about this. The next 2 meetings we have in August are already pretty full. We have Williams coming back with their recommendations. So we've already got quite a bit on our plate for August. And this is not a pressing issue, and if people.
And he wants to. He said he wanted to meet with residents and talk to us. That's going to take time. The travel schedule works better.
But to your point, it will be heard on September 6th.
And I'm all for that. That's why I said the date. Yeah, I don't want it to linger anymore.
Okay. Next up is an ordinance amending various sections of Chapter 1, Historic Preservation, Title 11 of the Village Code of the Village of Riverside, relative to the administrative review of certain certificates of appropriateness. Director Adams.
Yes, our preservation code currently allows a 3-person subcommittee to review and approve certificates of appropriateness for in-kind repairs and replacements of historic materials. The purpose of this was to allow a faster process for owners of landmark properties to obtain building permits and complete the work. The subcommittee, however, still requires an open meeting and therefore still causes a bit of a delay as staff tries to pull together commissioners to put together a special meeting. The chairperson asked staff to look into amending the code to allow an administrative review of these types of certificates of appropriateness, which is something that other communities with historic districts do. So he asked that staff look into that and try to streamline process and alleviate some of the burden that we put on our historic property owners. So the Preservation Commission reviewed a draft at their April regular meeting and asked for some revisions. The village attorney and I worked on putting together those revisions, and the Preservation Commission reviewed them and approved them by a 6-0 vote at their last meeting. The proposed amendment would allow for an administrative review then of these types of certificates of appropriateness. All certificates of appropriateness approved by this creates a designee, so the Preservation Commission can designate a staff member to be the administrative person to review this. Any certificate of appropriateness approved by the designee would be reported to the commission at their next regular meeting. Any application received that the designee feels does not meet the criteria for administrative review would be referred to the full commission for a review. The amendment allows commission by formal action to designate an individual on village staff to administratively review these applications that meet the criteria for the administrative review, i.e. their in-kind repairs and or replacements. So that is the amendment that you have before you.
I'd ask for a motion to approve an ordinance amending various sections of Chapter 1, Title 11 of the Village Code relative to the administrative review of certain certificates of appropriateness.
So moved.
By Mr. Sevedy, second by Mr. Gisa. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Gisa.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Dowling.
Aye.
Trustee Stefan. Trustee Peters. Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Next up is an ordinance amending Title 8 of the Village Code of Village of Riverside to add a new Chapter 14, Small Wireless Facilities, relative to the permitting, regulation, and deployment of small wireless facilities. Attorney Morris.
Thank you, President Sells. As you can see, this is a kind of a lengthy new chapter that we're adding to our village code, and I just wanted to take a couple minutes and give the board some context as to what small cell is, how this legislation came to be, why we need to implement the act, and how we're going to implement the act. So you guys are all kind of familiar with the traditional cell phone towers, the big towers with all the antennas on top that municipalities have been dealing with for 20 years or so. Small cell installations are different. They're shorter. They're typically an antenna facility attached to an existing utility pole or a standalone shorter pole with an equipment box partway up. I passed out at the dais some pictures just to give you some examples. The first page, it says, what is a small cell? You'll see the one on the left is a recent T-Mobile installation that was done in Hinsdale that we dealt with. The middle one is in St. Charles, and the one on the right is a streetlight in Schaumburg. The next page is just some different kind of designs. You can see in the middle there like a decorative street light that has an antenna attachment on the top. And then they're also interested in putting these on street light installations. So I have a picture on the right there showing that. And so kind of the reasoning behind why this is all happening is the telecommunications industry has been pushing for a lot of years, especially at the federal level, for less local control of where any telecommunications equipment gets installed. They view municipalities in a lot of ways as obstructionist to what they're trying to do, and they don't like the fact that different municipalities have different regulations. So they've had success at the federal level over the years. But what's happening now is they are preparing to roll out a 5G network. So if you look at at least on your Android phones in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see 4G next to your bars, because that's the kind of existing network that we're all on. And so in the next couple of years, they're going to be rolling out this 5G network. And The strategy that the telecommunications industry has adopted involves a lot of these small cell installations in order to facilitate 5G. And so the legislative strategy that they adopted, although they're still pushing at the federal level, they took this kind of template or statute and introduced it in all 50 states, trying to get it passed that gives them a whole lot more control as to where these small cell installations go, including putting them on municipal infrastructure with not much say by the municipalities as to where they go, inability to say no in a lot of cases. And I'll get into that in a minute. The industry is very excited about 5G because of all the things it's going to be able to do. If you look at the evolutions of networks from 2G to 3G to 4G, you go back to the flip phones, which were 2G, and they only had the ability to essentially do some texting. And then with 3G, we had more internet capabilities, and with 4G, we've had the advent of the streaming video. And 5G is going to be this big jump forward that will be able to do all those things, but is going to add things like 3D video and high-def streaming video. And importantly, it's going to have the ability to support all these smart home functions that we see today. So there's, your Nest thermostats and your smart refrigerators and your smart washers and dryers. There's all these things in our house now that are wireless, and that's pushing the existing networks to their capability, to the max capability that they have. So it's going to be able to take all those on. And they're even anticipating and building into it the ability to control things like driverless cars when they come online in a few years. So the telecom industry is very excited about this and has trouble understanding why municipalities are a little less excited. But we're less excited because of the nature of the legislation that they passed, which impacted some of our kind of traditional areas of authority. The federal government, the FCC regulations have always protected our proprietary rights over our own infrastructure, our zoning authority, and our ability to contract with these individual companies and reach terms to place stuff on our infrastructure. And this new law impacts all that and takes away some of those rights from municipalities. So when it was introduced, municipalities were not happy about it. Illinois Municipal League was asked by the bill sponsor to sit down with the telecom industry and try to negotiate some changes and make this a better bill. The IML did get some concessions, but at the end of the day, they felt they weren't going to be able to get any further because this legislation is introduced in all 50 states. The telecom guys said, well, I can't give you this in Illinois because then all the other states are going to want it. And so there was only so far they were willing to go. But after those negotiations were completed, the IML kind of stepped aside, feeling like they'd gotten some things and made it somewhat better bill. And they went neutral on it, which left the individual municipalities and their intergovernmental groups to kind of fight it on their own. So DuPage Mayors and Managers and Northwest Municipal Conference, City of Aurora, Illinois Chiefs of Police stepped in and fought this legislation and were able to defeat it last spring, a year ago. And so it kind of sat around all last summer, and then in October, the telecom industry reached out to the groups that were opposing this and said, hey, we'd like to sit down and try to work through some of these issues. So in October, last October, there was about 25 hours of face-to-face negotiations between the telecom industry and these municipal groups. I took part in those negotiations on behalf of the City of Aurora and other municipalities, and we were able to get some improvements in the bill. We got additional protections for historic landmarks and historic districts. We got some increases in the fee structures. And we got some movement on some of the zoning issues and a lot of public safety technology protections. And among other things, there was a big range of issues and we worked through some things. But at the end of the day, they weren't willing to go any further, again, after a certain point. And the bill had started from such a bad place that it was still not a great deal for municipalities, so a number of municipalities and those groups continued to oppose it, but enough went neutral. The Illinois Chiefs of Police and Northwest Municipal Conference went neutral on the bill, and that was enough to swing a few legislators, and it was passed in the veto session. It then sat around and didn't get sent to the governor until February. People thought he was going to veto it for quite a while, and he ended up signing it as is in April. And it had a June 1st effective date and a substantive implementation date of August 1st. So everyone's been kind of scrambling since then to put together the legislation that you need in your codes to kind of implement the act and to provide what protections we can when these telecom companies come with the small cell installations. So the one you have before it is the one that I've developed in conjunction with a couple other attorneys at our firm, and we feel it's very comprehensive. It provides as much protections as we're going to get, along with a couple other pieces that we're going to see in the next couple months, including some design standards that we're going to be working with staff to bring back that will give to the telecom companies when they come in that say, here's how we want, if you're going to put up a pole in Riverside, this is what we want it to look like. But very briefly, some of the things that the Act does, just so you understand, it makes these small cell installations, whether it's an attachment on an existing pole or even putting up a new pole, permitted uses in all rights of way in the village. So they've taken our zoning authority and said, within rights of way, we get to do this. You can't put it through any kind of zoning review. There's certain zoning districts where it's supposed to be permitted uses too, wherever there's exclusively commercial and industrial uses. Riverside is a rare community that has no districts like that. Every one of our zoning districts has some kind of residential or component to it. And so we can still maintain control on the private property within the village in terms of these installations. But in the right-of-way, they are going to be permitted uses. Some of the other things that we're able to do, we can make them submit an application still. So there's a template application that we're working with to develop where they will have to give us certain information, including a structural analysis so if they want to put it on a particular existing pole, a structural analysis showing that it can support the equipment, pictures, before and after type of pictures, what it's going to look like. There's strict permitting timelines in the Act. We only have 30 days to determine whether an application is complete, 90 to grant or deny when it's on an existing pole, and 120 if a new pole is involved. Again, it limits our ability to say no in most cases. There are some height limitations which are reflected in the Act and in the ordinance. There's protections for our public safety telecommunications. But the important thing is these design standards. So we're going to bring these back to you for approval, but we're going to try to say, well, if it's going to be in our parkway and you are going to put up a new pole, we want it to look a certain way. And we have the ability to do that, especially because the whole village is a historic district, essentially. And because we are a historic district, we are able to say within the ordinance that you can't put them on our historic gas lamps because we're a historic district. If you're not in a historic district, you can't make that kind of exclude a whole class of poles like that. But that's one of the things we were able to get into the Act in the negotiations, and that was something that we had Riverside in mind when we did that. We can put some controls on where the ground-mounted equipment goes. Verizon in particular is going to bring some ground-mounted equipment boxes associated with these. Most of the other companies are putting the equipment boxes on the poles. So we have some control over where those go, what those look like. We have application fees that we can require. We've got the max allowed under the Act in here, $650 application for a single pole, $1,000 if a new pole is involved. $350 if it's multiple poles on multiple locations on a single application. So they sometimes may come in with like 4 sites that they want to do, all similar technology on similar poles, and they'll bundle those applications, and that's $350 each. We still have the ability to make them enter into an agreement with us as to what the kind of terms and conditions of having this stuff up there are going to be going forward. So if it's abandoned or if it falls over, what happens in those? How's the electricity paid for? Those sorts of things will all go in a pole attachment agreement that we've developed, and we're going to customize with staff as well. And we, under those agreements, we're also authorized to charge them $200 a year to attach a single location to our pole. That's down significantly from the going rate that has been in the past. I think the one that we have on our siren pole is $250, $300 a month. But it's also up significantly from the $20 a year they proposed in their original bill. So there's a little movement there. So again, that $200, it's capped. It's an annual fee that's allowed under the Act. We've got the max. So adopting this ordinance, although it's long and the Act is not good, adopting the ordinance along with these design standards and the agreement and the application form we're developing are the best protections we can give the village under the Act. And so that's kind of where we're at. It's something that the legislature and the telecom industry has stuck us with, and as municipalities, we just have to do the best we can.
So I'd ask for a motion to approve an ordinance amending Title 8 of the Village Code, adding a new Chapter 14 relative to the permitting, regulation, and deployment of small wireless facilities. Mr. Pollack, second by Ms. Peters. Any further discussion? Thank you for all the hard work you've put in on this, Attorney Morris, and watching out for Riverside as you always do. Please call the roll.
So they will not be able to put it on any of the gas lights?
They would not be able to put them on any of the gas lights.
And they would not be able to put it on any of the new wayfaring signs that we're putting up?
That's correct. Another thing that we negotiated, they had, in the definition of utility pole, they had signs, and we were able to successfully get that taken out because we were picturing exactly these kind of signs, or welcome to Riverside or whatever. We don't want small cell installations, them to have that ability.
And one thing that you did say that disturbed me just a little bit is they can now put a pole on our parkway if they wish? Because I don't think we have too many poles in parkways.
Right, yeah. So it's going to be interesting. Hopefully they will default towards the ComEd lines, because they can put under ICC regs, they can put those on ComEd lines even cheaper, about $15 a year under existing regulations. So I think that will be their preference, especially if they can't use the gas lamps. But there may be instances, and we have to be prepared for it the best we can, where they're going to want to put up new poles. And it's hard to tell how soon this is going to come and how many. I was met with AT&T in a similarly sized community the other day, and AT&T was only thinking of one pole initially. But there's also reports that they may want these eventually when 5G gets really rolling every 150 to 500 feet for each provider. So we could be looking at a lot of small cells.
Can we force them on the same pole?
We cannot, and they don't want to be on the same pole.
I know.
That's one of the things that they made sure of.
So you have 10 providers and you have a location that's a prime spot, and you have 10 new poles in your backyard.
Yep.
This is totally random, but why don't they put them in trees? I'm just curious.
Good question. I don't know.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Trustee Powell.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Bowden.
No, don't, just because I can. Because it's ridiculous. Sorry.
Trustee Sedley.
Aye.
Trustee Peters. Aye.
You want more
Motion
control.
carries.
Come on, more control. This is crazy.
It is crazy. Okay. Moving on now to considerations. Just looking around, I'm going to suggest a 5-minute little break, and then we'll come back for consideration. So please re-adjourn in 5 minutes. Reconvene. Reconvene, not re-adjourn. Back to work. Next up are considerations, which are informal discussions about various topics. These do not lead to any kind of binding votes or binding decisions. They're discussions among the board and our residents. First up, and I'm so glad that we're finally going to get to do this because we put this off I don't know how many times, is a discussion of wayfinding signage. Director Apt.
So wayfinding signage was a capital item in 2017. We went through design with Point B to incorporate our branding and create a wayfinding signage plan for the village. This was carried over to 2018 capital budget for actual manufacturing and installation. When you had discussed this, you would ask that staff review the number of signs that were recommended and kind of take a look at the size and legibility of the signs and ask to review it again before we go out to bid. So we are here before you. We've been working with Point B, IDOT, and our engineer on this project for the past several months. In creating our construction documents and applying for permits from IDOT, staff had our engineering firm provide a post-detail and minimum pole size recommendation based on the final sign size and materials, and the engineer's recommendation came in with a minimum 5-inch pole needed to provide the support for the sign. This is significantly larger than the 3-inch that staff had estimated and selected as part of the estimation process, and the cost for 5-inch poles is about 2 times the estimated cost for a 3-inch pole for a decorative street pole. So based on this increase and the proposed number of signs, which was about 26 to 27 signs that we had identified, just the fabrication of the signs exceeds our 2018 proposed budget of $52,000. So we were looking at, as I said, 26 to 27 signs, and we're looking at a sign cost of about $3,800 to $4,800 per sign. So based on that, the EDC had their discussion a couple weeks ago. Based on those numbers, we asked them to review this and prioritize sign types or sign locations based on these numbers. So based on that cost estimate, they worked with the assumption that we could only do 10 signs, and so they worked to try to prioritize those. They are recommending prioritizing signs that are on the perimeter of town and adding directional signs to help guide visitors to the central business district once turning off of the major arterials. And those major arterials they picked were based on like CMAP recommendations as well as our village-wide traffic study. The commission also felt that capturing zoo traffic was vital. So their recommendations were, they recommended 4 gateway signs, and those locations would be at Harlem and Burlington, at 31st and 1st, First and Forest, and Harlem and Long Common. And then they also recommended then 6 directional signs, 1 at Ridgewood and Gulf, so that would be by the south gate entrance to the zoo, 1 at Ridgewood and First to capture that eastbound traffic from the zoo, a directional sign at 31st and Des Plaines, a directional sign also at 31st and Des Plaines, but one that would be more oriented towards Des Plaines to get that southbound traffic, and then also 1 at Delaplane and Burlington, so that once people are turning off of Harlem, they know they have a little bit further to go down to get to the central business district. And then similar for Long Common, 1 at Long Common and Evelyn, we have that large island in that area. It's a little bit of a ways down from Harlem Avenue once you turn onto Long Common, so kind of encourage people to just keep going, just keep swimming, and you'll get to the downtown. So those were the 10 locations that they did. A lot of these are on IDOT right-of-way, so they said if we're unable to get IDOT approval for some of the gateway signs, another recommendation they had for a sign would be at Kimbark and Forest. So that's their first recommendation to the board on prioritizing signs. Also discussed, staff had received some feedback from Labara that some signage on First Avenue and Harlem Avenue is necessary in order to help attract people's attention and direct them to the downtown. They believe lack of exposure to the nearby traffic is a detriment to their business. Their belief is that a directional sign on those 2 roads would be more beneficial than a gateway sign. Both the EDC and our CMAP Central Business District Plan had recommended gateway signs on those roadways, just for reference. And then Labara has also expressed interest in a directional sign or perhaps a business directory sign advertising specific businesses on Ridgewood and Gulf near the south gate exit of the Brookfield Zoo to kind of help capture some of that traffic that's leaving the zoo. The businesses and or the chamber could purchase and install a business directory sign. However, any such sign placed in the public right-of-way would need to be authorized by the village board. The EDC discussed this proposed change from gateways to directionals on First and Harlem Avenues, as well as the additional directional sign and the business directory sign over on Ridgewood, and they were not in favor of making the change from gateway to directional signs on First and on Harlem. But they were favorable to adding a directional sign at Gulf and Ridgewood, and they also proposed doing a directional sign at Ridgewood and First Avenue, so at that intersection when you're waiting at the light. And they thought that that would be better than a business directory sign. Also noted, staff has applied for a special town name sign, is what IDOT calls it, for those gateway signs. We applied for the ones on First and Forest first, just to kind of run it up the flagpole and see if they were going to be okay with our proposed sign size and the size of the lettering and everything. So those signs actually did just get approved, so I'm waiting for the paperwork to come back, but I did get an email that those have been approved. So at least we know our signs meet their criteria, so now we can move forward with applying for the other signs that happen to be in IDOT right-of-ways and providing them with those locations. If we choose to do something other than a gateway sign, we don't have approvals for that sign type yet because we've not proposed any directional signs out there, and those are considered a different type of sign than a special town name sign. Those are considered community wayfinding signs, and they have different requirements. So we would have to reapply for a different sign type if we choose to go with something different than a gateway on Harlem or on First Avenue. So just to keep that in mind. So staff is looking for some direction on you on changing the sign type on First and on Harlem from gateway to directional. If you are okay with adding directional signs near the zoo's south gate, and if you are okay with allowing a limited business directory sign on Ridgewood and or Forest Avenue, and also any input, or if you're okay with the EDC's recommendations on their prioritizations for the proposed signs. I did provide you with a map that outlines the proposed locations that they are, the new proposed locations that they prioritize. So you have that before you. The black dot is the gateway sign and the pink dot is the directional sign. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
I have a couple of questions. Okay. Seems like we've walked away from the entrance over on the bridge coming in off of Ogden, coming off of Ogden, Fairbanks, which is major entrance into our city,
yes.
our village.
In discussion and in my memo to the EDC, since we did have to prioritize, I did note that we do already have a sign there. It's just not one of our new gateways. So there is a Preserve America, Riverside has our population sign there. So there is still some sort of notification that you're coming into the village, albeit it's not. So it's not like there's no signage there. There is a sign there. So that was something that they considered in their discussion.
And the second part of my question is, why can't we have a gateway directional sign? So you have the gateway on one side and the directional on the other side, so the leaves go. So you have one pole, one side says welcome to Riverside, the other side has the gateway, or has the directional. So we can eliminate half of our signs, 3/4 of our signs, go with 5 signs, and
we can look into that. Again, the requirements for directional are different than the requirements for a town name sign. So it's just that level of review that took me 4.5 months to get IDOT approval on my sign. So I'm a little reluctant to punt it quite that far, to run a whole new thing up the flagpole, and I also don't know if that changes what our structural requirements are going to be if we now have 2 signs side mounted onto the one pole, and that also increases our width requirements as well. And I'm thinking on Harlem, there's definitely not going to be room for something quite that big. Even on First Avenue, that parkway area between the bike path and the curb, at least on the, what would that be, the west side, it's not that big. I don't know that we could do it there. We might be able to do it on the east side for the northbound traffic. That kind of width might be feasible in that area. I think there's a little bit more room over there.
Joe, there's kind of just a wayfinding theory that you want to have a gateway sign at the entry portal and then 2 or 3 blocks down, you keep them going so they don't get lost. So
And that was the idea
you'll
with
usually
that.
see a gateway dot and then a directional dot inboard somewhat to make sure people understand they're going the right way. And so you kind of see, like, there's one at Harlem, and then there's one on Delaplane. There's the gateway sign up at Long Common, and then a little bit farther they have the, you're still getting there, just keep, your turn, keep swimming.
You know, my position on this is, I'm sort of against signs. The fewer the signs, the better, right? I kind of feel like the gateway signs make sense, and obviously the parking lot signs, but the directional signs to me, even on Evelyn or anywhere internal, I think it takes away from the natural beauty of Riverside. That's just me. And I think that if you need a directional to get around downtown Riverside, I mean, there's bigger issues, right? Because it's only a block long. I just think that having these signs pop up, I've been noticing more signs lately, and it's kind of been frustrating me as a resident. So I think gateway signs are fantastic, but I think the internal stuff, from my opinion, is unnecessary.
So they're still fairly minimal, you know, and again, I think they're kind of trying to focus at the perimeter, so our village-wide traffic study really identified Desplaines, Woodside, as a major, place that people were coming into the village from, so I think that was a lot of the EDC's direction, was that we need to capture that traffic there at 31st and Desplaines, and let them know they're coming into Riverside, and just, you know, go a little bit further and you'll reach the downtown. So I think that's why they were trying to capture those 2 signs there at 31st and Desplaines. 31st is, again, an IDOT route, so I believe we would still need to get an IDOT permit, and their idea was a directional sign, so that is one that's a new one. We kind of have to run up the flagpole with them and make sure what we're proposing meets their standards versus what's okay for a local road, so.
I mean, the 5G, we're talking about self-driving cars. I feel like everyone uses their phone to get places, so a directional sign to me is like writing down directions on a piece of paper for your car. It's just me.
Understood.
Right, I mean.
So, I think the other idea, though, is
And it saves
that
money.
level of opportunity, and you drive by and you see that gateway sign and you say, oh, Riverside, okay, well, maybe I'll check out what that is. Or I'm gonna put it in my phone and try to find out what's happening in Riverside, and hopefully they find our social media, they find our chamber's website, they find things like that, and they can then choose at a later date to come into town, and they've got the GPS and they know what they're doing. But if you happen to get that person that's just like, hey, that sounds interesting, and they turn down, you know, hopefully Long Common's so lovely, they just keep running down Long Common. I mean, I know I would. Sometimes I end up on Delaplane and somewhere weird because I'm not paying attention. But all in all, you end up downtown and it's a lovely drive, and then you see our water tower, and it's all good. But there are, you know, some people that might give up fairly quickly and decide to just turn around and go back the way they came. So the idea is if you have the directional sign, they know they're on their way to that thing that they're trying to get to. So.
I like the thought on capturing the wayfaring signs by the high school and the south entrance. I think that's great. We can't get any further west on 31st Street, though, can we, to capture some more of that north entrance to the zoo?
Right, I mean, I think the closest we could get would be right at that 31st and
That
1st
is
Street
where our
entrance.
property ends.
The gate is signage at First and Forest in the southeast corner, so there's already that obelisk kind of thing there. So we're going to have 2 gateway signs there.
Well, it would be, we currently have a little brown sign that's out there, so the proposal is to put it in that location, so it's kind of a little bit south of that intersection, and then it would be facing the traffic as opposed to kind of off more on Forest Avenue. So the idea is that as you're driving up First Avenue, it's something that you see as you're coming under the underpass.
Also, it wouldn't be literally at the intersection, it would be down First a little bit.
Yeah, so it'd probably be, you know, like 100 feet south of the intersection.
Now, the other thing that I think is really this number 4 here, directional Ridgewood and First, captures eastbound traffic from the zoo. That's also where we had talked about the potential of this business directory kind of sign for our business district. Right. So I'm not quite clear on what the EDC
The EDC was not in favor of a business directory sign. If a sign was going to go there, their recommendation would be that it would be a directional sign.
And say something like
Just
Riverside.
downtown. Riverside downtown or business
dining
district.
or
Mhm.
something like that.
Exactly.
And that's also true at Golf and Ridgewood?
Exactly.
We'd find some verbiage that said.
Shopping, dining,
Right.
downtown.
I have to say, I agree with Trustee Gisa. I mean, when we first started all of this, I just don't know of anybody who uses signs anymore to find something. Everybody uses their phone. I mean, that's how people get places.
From my experience, the signs aren't really directional signs. They're to create awareness and back of mind. I know there's shopping and dining down here. I see your point, and you're right, but I think it's more about awareness and branding.
So what?
So an example is the zoo. A lot of people don't realize that if you go down Forest, if you go to the light and keep going, you're going to hit places to eat after you leave the zoo. And I think capturing that as the point of what EDC was trying to accomplish was making people aware of Riverside Central Business District by kind of having those signage reminders as people are leaving of, oh, okay, well, I didn't want to eat at the zoo, but we've got a couple of options down this way. And so that kind of creates that interest, whereas people that may not have intended to come into Riverside now are.
And that's, that's a really good point. Because, I mean, what you and I are talking about is,
the interior.
If I want to go to Choo Choo, I'm going to type in Choo Choo. And then that's going to take me to Choo Choo. But that's not what these signs really are intended to do. To Doug's point, these signs are just intended to say, there's shopping and dining down here. There's a train station down here. There's a metro station down here. I mean, so
The
that's
internal
that
ones,
point.
though, is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Evelyn, I'm talking about Kimbar. I mean, I get it over there. Having said that, after 2 hours at the zoo, I want to take a Xanax, not going to the choo-choo. That's me.
Well, let me ask. Maybe that's another level of review. Then, if with the signs that are described here, could you show us what each of these signs would actually say?
I can give you verbiage. It'll take me a little bit of time.
I mean, you don't have to mock them up, but you've got some examples in here, of signs. But
Right.
It doesn't show, like this one west-facing sign on pole, shopping and dining, Quincy Street Arts District. It might be useful if we actually could see what the verbiage would be with each one of these signs, and then if there are ones, like to your point, that are kind of obvious, those we could weed out.
Like the random ones, like that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that when you're in Riverside, it's all about getting lost, right? I mean, how many people have you heard that have moved here? No, really, you get it, it's off the grid, right? So I mean, that's
The joy of exploration.
I think sticking more signs in Riverside is not consistent with,
I agree.
There you go, finally.
But I think we should also look at, for uniformity, we should look at by the bridge.
Yeah.
I mean, that just makes sense that we should,
Well, particularly if we take one or two of these signs
the
out.
middle sign.
Yeah.
Right, that frees up that one to be able to.
And then I did have one other comment, just about that one that's at Golf and Ridgewood. How many people turn out of the zoo and don't go left? Because I'm not sure if we need 2 directional signs there, the more I've thought about it. I mean,
How many are turning towards Brookfield versus turning towards First
Right.
Avenue?
So if you're gonna catch them at the First and Ridgewood intersection, do you need to catch them coming out of Golf? Does that make sense?
That's we could reach out to Jennifer Bader over at the zoo and see if they have any sort of numbers on how many people come in through south entrance
I
versus
assume
north entrance,
not
or,
many, yeah.
if they have any of those kind of numbers for us to be able to use. I don't know that we have a traffic count for that particular intersection. I don't know that that was really part of our village-wide traffic study, was that intersection right there, so. I know they did First and Forest counts, like on Ridgewood coming through, but I'll double check those numbers and see what we have.
So with regard to the bridge, where are you envisioning that sign being? Because that'd be in Lyons.
No, it would, yeah, because it's
Be
a
on our side
county
of the
bridge, correct?
There's
County
one there
bridge.
now, right?
There's one right there at
It'd be
Millbridge
like across from
and,
PJ Clint. Or what?
You know, or it could be on the other side of the bridge, as you come over the bridge, it's there, there's a series of signs there.
But my point is if you've come across Millbridge, you already know you're going to Riverside.
I think you go into any of these things, you know you're going into Riverside.
No,
It's
you don't.
more of a welcoming to the.
I see what you're saying, you're saying you can put it on the curb right down the corner. So.
Yeah, if you could get it out on Ogden, it's different.
This is Riverside and the population right there or something.
But that's after
Yeah.
you cross the bridge.
that's just, just after you go over the bridge.
Right.
And that's where we were proposing a gateway sign, was to replace that one with the gateway sign.
I mean, yeah, I guess that's your point. But that goes
Originally.
to standardizing.
Just from uniformity alone
Absolutely.
as well.
Right, okay. Okay, are we done with signs?
One other question.
Yes.
I'd like to, you said you wanted to see exactly what's on each of the signs.
Yeah.
I'd also like a detail of the orientation of the sign. 'Cause this map doesn't show us, you mentioned that the one at southeast corner of Forest and First is for northbound traffic before you get to the intersection. I want to see a detail of that for each location to
Okay,
know,
the orientation.
see who that, who that's oriented to and exactly, more precisely where it's to be located.
Okay.
Anything else on signs? Sure.
Again, I'm speaking on behalf of the Lions Club and the Chamber of Commerce, and not on any commission I volunteer on. Given the fact that the cost of the signs have just gone up, the Chamber and the Lions Club would like to propose to this village to allow for a lot of signage that other communities have, which kind of read like the Lions Club welcomes you to Riverside, or the Chamber of Commerce welcomes you to the Central Business District downtown, and would certainly pitch in for the costs of these signs to help with for paying for them. That's all I have.
Anything else? Okay, we're going to move on then to a discussion of possible amendments to the village code relative to the advertisement of alcoholic liquor. Director Apt. You didn't even have to sit down.
So our liquor code and our sign code both restrict advertisement of any alcoholic liquor. And the village deferred this discussion on this matter from our June meeting, so we're discussing it again. So currently, our provisions are that no advertising, no sign or advertisement of any alcoholic liquor can be placed upon or outside any building in the village except as herein provided in our sign codes chapter with respect to the retail sale of beer and wine by a holder of a Class A liquor license. So in our sign ordinance, we have the allowance that the holder of a Class A liquor license for the retail sale of beer and wine in original containers, so this is packaged liquor for consumption off-site, may advertise the sale of such products, provided that only one outside sign shall be allowed to advertise the sale of beer and only one outside sign shall be allowed to advertise the sale of wine. Additional indoor signs advertising such products may be affixed to the window area of the licensed premises in accordance with our sign area limitations. Recently, the village has had to ask some of our restaurants to remove various signs that violate our advertisement of any alcoholic liquor restrictions. This has included neon window signs, some patio umbrellas with beer or liquor company logos on them, some sandwich board signs. And staff's received some feedback from these restaurants that these codes that we have are overly restrictive. So they've asked the village to reconsider allowing some of these alcoholic advertising, for example, the patio umbrellas with logos, or perhaps the sandwich board signs that have a little logos on them, or even having the sandwich board signs that have their drink specials or something advertised on them. Other villages have recently adopted various changes to their liquor codes, including extending the hours of operation in their efforts to encourage economic development, attract and retain visitors. And the village has amended our liquor code to allow for things like wine bars, distilleries, brew pubs, microbreweries, and most recently, the delivery of alcohol in an effort to address current trends in business models. So this is for the board to discuss and see if you're interested in changing the code, or if we want, based on some of the feedback from the restaurants, if we are willing to have it be less restrictive, or if we want to keep it the way it's been.
I personally think that liquor on an umbrella is not exactly, I think we're being over restrictive by not allowing some of our outdoor our outdoor venues not to have that. I think it's over. Now, I don't agree with putting neon Miller Lite signs up in the windows. But I think when it comes to umbrellas and when it comes to, the sandwich boards that just have, whatever Corona on the top and then their daily specials, I don't see that as being a problem.
I have no problems with sandwich boards with these signs. I could live with umbrellas with the signs. I have no problems with liquor, beer, wine being advertised in window signs, subject to our window sign restrictions. The one area I would draw the line is on awnings, because that's kind of part of the building architecture. And I think on an awning, I would not want to see that. But otherwise, I'd be fine with that.
I would want to keep it the way it is and keep it as restrictive as possible, personally.
Okay. I still got the other stuff that seems to be more important on my mind, but I'm fine with sandwich boards, I'm fine with umbrellas, not a big fan of the neon ones blinking across the street or something like that. That's probably where I would land. Think about in France when you're on the sidewalk, or in Germany or anywhere else south in Europe, they all have advertising all over their umbrellas, and they have sandwich boards, and it's a nice feel, right? Again, I think the biggest thing is to make sure that whatever they have, it's decent, proper, not blowing around town, and is well maintained, right? That's more important to me than, so that's my position.
I think, well, the window signage and those sandwich boards are already legislated, so we're fine there. So it's just the content that we're being less restrictive on. I'm fine with the umbrellas, and I agree with Trustee Pollock on the awnings. So
I'm fine with the sandwich boards. I'm a little more hesitant about the umbrellas. They are a little more permanent, whereas I think of the sandwich boards as going out when the business is open, and it goes in when the business is closed. But the umbrellas I think of as being out there all the time. And so that would be a concern for me, I guess. Not that I couldn't be convinced, but.
Right, so stick with us again.
Yeah.
So the umbrellas and the sandwich boards, those are freebies, right? I mean, that's marketing for Miller Lite or this or that. From my perspective, and Riverside's perspective, in trying to keep the continuity of all that we're investing in the downtown central business district, to all of a sudden see Miller Lite signs and, I don't know, Coors Light, whatever, these umbrellas popping up, I think that takes away from the storefronts itself. We're investing in these storefronts, we're doing this, we're doing that, and all of a sudden, you're gonna be walking down Burlington and there's gonna be a Miller Lite, that's a freebie. Why? Why not why not invest in those?
We're on Burlington with
Or Forest, wherever.
you can't sit at Molly's and have a sandwich outside because the sun is so bad, or at the little Mexican restaurant on the corner.
They can have umbrellas. They can have umbrellas. I'm just saying no writing on it.
I agree with Scott. Every time I've been in Europe, the Campari umbrellas and all that kind of stuff, that doesn't detract from, St. Mike's Square in Venice.
Well, this isn't St. Mike's Square in Venice.
Exactly. That's my point. Exactly.
That's 1,000 years old.
You've made my point. This isn't St. Mike's Square.
Just think about it. I would say just think about it and drive down Madison Avenue in Forest Park, and then drive down whatever the main drag is in Hinsdale and see what you think. That's all I would say.
I guess my 2 cents would be, and I think Molly's is a perfect example. If you don't know Molly's is there,
you drive right by it.
You drive right by it. If you're driving down and you see an umbrella with a Guinness label on it, then you're like, oh, look, it's a little Irish bar here.
Yeah.
So as long as it's tastefully done, and I think all of our businesses, I think we can count on that, given their past track record to do things. I agree. I would not want the neon signs. I don't think any of us want that. But the umbrellas and the sandwich boards, I personally would have no trouble with that.
And again, to the window signs and the sandwich boards is already in their code, so they can't put these cheap plastic Miller Lite sandwich boards up there. They have to conform to the existing code.
Okay, so I think, right, okay. So is that enough from us? Does that satisfy? Okay. Thank you. And last but not least, a discussion regarding amending the licensing requirements for vacation rentals and for bed and breakfast. Director Abt.
At our first meeting, the village board discussed increasing the maximum number of days for a vacation rental. Several neighbors attended the meeting and voiced their concerns about the impact a vacation rental is having on neighboring properties. They expressed serious concerns about allowing additional rental days to the existing vacation rental. The village board at that meeting stated they would revisit the vacation rental ordinance and discuss potential changes to address the concerns that were brought up by neighbors. As you know, the board did not pass an ordinance increasing the number of days, so that is still at 60 days in a calendar year. Our text amendment that allows vacation rentals was approved back in 2016. At that time, there was some concern by the Planning and Zoning Commission about allowing this type of use in our residential districts. So therefore, the code amendment included certain restrictions to ensure the use's impact on neighbors were minimized. That was the hope. The proposed restrictions for the licensing included limiting to 60 rental days in a calendar year. The village board adopted these changes, but vacation rentals were listed as a permitted use, and the comfort level with that was because we were really restricting it to being basically an accessory use to a principal use of a residential use. So currently, both vacation rentals and bed and breakfasts are permitted uses in our business districts. Vacation rentals are considered permitted uses in our residential districts. However, bed and breakfasts are classified as special uses. And again, that is because that is considered a principal business use for the most part. So that's, I think, why that was originally selected to be a special use in the residential districts. You have copies of the bed and breakfast and the vacation rental license requirements that were included in your packet to have as review and a preliminary discussion on possible amendments to the code. Some of the items of concern that were brought up by neighbors included parking and traffic, noise, the number of visitors and overnight guests that are allowed at a vacation rental, having parties or special events, and allowing business uses in the residential districts. So staff is just looking for direction on any changes that the board would like to see to the ordinance relative to vacation rentals and or bed and breakfasts.
One is I think we should restrict the amount of residents or the amount of guests that are allowed in a residence, no matter what the size of the residence. And I don't, what that number is, whether it be 6 or 7, but it has to be, I think, more in line with what we were anticipating when we drafted this originally. So I would say that would be one thing. Secondly, I would restrict any non-paying guests to be allowed on the residence, except for obviously family members. So if I rent a room, I can't invite my cousin and 12 friends over to spend the evening. So it's only for myself or my wife and my children or whatever. And third, I think the availability to have any venues would be, any kind of weddings, receptions, any of that would not be what I would consider applicable in a residential neighborhood.
My feeling is that I'd like to keep a certain level of vacation rentals as a permitted use, but in line with what Trustee Ballerine was just describing, where it's permitted if it's truly for an accessory use to the principal use, which is a house, meaning that it's just basically a handful of people coming over to stay the weekend with you, much like if your family from out of town came to visit. A few more cars, a few more people, they go out about town or do their business at wherever, and they're spending the night there. So that would mean, 7, 10 people, I don't know, no guests or limited number of guests, whatever, and that would continue to be permitted. but then create a special use category that would allow someone to request going beyond that, having events possibly, having more than the prescribed number of people, or whatever it is they want, but that's a special use, and then the neighbors do get notified, there's a hearing, we can regulate it, we can add appropriate conditions that meet the needs of the property owner, but also ensure that there's no impact on neighbors. And we can specialize it under the special use. Also going back, I forgot to mention under the, yeah.
So you're suggesting that would be, the special use thing would be something that would happen each time an event was requested?
Oh, no, just once. So in other words, if someone wants to operate a vacation rental or a bed and breakfast, and they want to be able, they have a house and a property that's big enough and can accommodate larger than 7 people without impacting the neighbors, they have the opportunity to come before the Planning Commission and our board and show how they can operate without that impact, and also the neighbors can step up.
Can you just clarify, you said vacation or vacation rental or bed and breakfast? You don't mean bed and breakfast, because bed and breakfast is already a special use.
Right.
So you mean bed and breakfast or vacation rental or Airbnb?
Vacation rental.
I don't see, from a public impact perspective, I don't see the difference between a bed and breakfast and a vacation rental.
What's the number of days? I mean, a vacation rental is 80, the bed and breakfast is
Under our
365.
current code, but I'm just thinking, speaking generically, whatever regulations in terms of limitations you put on it, whether they're serving breakfast to the guests or not serving breakfast to the guests, there's really, in my mind, there's no difference.
So you're basically
in terms of the public impact.
So you're basically suggesting 2 classes of vacation rentals, one that would be permitted or one that would be a special use if they wanted to also have the venue option.
Right. So basically it's permitted use if you have, I just make up numbers, I don't know what the right numbers are, but it's a permitted use if you have less than 10 people, they're not having guests, they're not having events at the facility, and it's a special use if they go beyond that in any way.
Or would you just have a third class, which would be an events center,
Keep it separate. Well, if it's a special use beyond that minimum, you can craft, you can accommodate events or not events, just larger crowds, whatever it is. You have flexibility. The village has flexibility. I mean, there's houses in the village where, that a large event venue or overnight stay venue could work and not impact neighbors if regulated properly. There's other places where there's no way you could do that. The other thing I was wanting to get at that I feel is critical to all of this for the vacation rentals and even for the larger, if you go beyond a special use, is owner occupancy. I think that is critical. Because of several reasons. One, and the primary reason, I guess, is that it needs to remain a house, primarily a house, where most of the activity and use of the property is a house where a family lives, or a couple lives, or a single person lives. And most of the time, it's being used as a house. There was an article we distributed from Sustainable City that describes what's going on with these vacation rentals in other towns and cities and villages where you get investors and no one lives in the house and it's just renters, guests coming and going. If that were next door to me, I'd be very upset. So I really think the owner occupancy is critical to this, to maintain the residential character, and it's eyes on the street, it's security, it's safety in the neighborhood. There's a familiar person there, most of the time. Just like you still have a neighbor, as opposed to a business being operated next door.
So explain to me what you mean by owner occupied. Does that mean that the owner has to be in the house when the guests are there?
No, It means that the owner of the house has to live there. That has to be their primary residence.
Not an investment property.
Not an investment property where no one lives there other than the renters, or an investment property where there's just an on-site manager living there.
So let's imagine a scenario where either, say I go away for 3 months a year and go to Florida. So my home or my condo is vacant, but it's my primary residence. You would allow that?
You're 30 miles, yeah, you can't be 30 miles away though.
I don't think I would be hesitant to allow that. I mean,
well, aren't you saying what Joe's saying then, that you want the owner there?
I want the owner living there.
While people are staying there?
Or within 30 miles or manager.
But that's what I'm getting at. If I live there and then I go to Florida for 3 months, but I've got a manager within 30 miles, would you be able to have that as a vacation rental?
I would suggest that would require a special use, and we could add appropriate conditions in that case to ensure that it's being managed properly, that there's a responsible party. I mean, if the house next door to me, or I always think of this as, what if this was next door to me, because it can be next door to any of us, what would I be comfortable with? And a vacant house for 3 months, that the only people there for 3 months are strangers, I'd feel very uncomfortable with that.
Okay, but if we allow 60 days, you can, that's 2 months. I mean, that's every day for 2 months. I mean, I don't know how you can stop that, other than saying that the resident, the person has to be on premise, or has to be within 30 miles. I just don't know how you can say that, because it would fall within the dates. It would fall within the 60 days.
But that defeats the purpose of like VRBO. And I think that turns into more of a bed and breakfast. That's traditional VRBO. You go online, you want to go on vacation with your family, you rent a house for a week, and there's not usually the owners in there, right? So, I mean, I kind of compare this to the picnicking topic that we had. I hate to bring up picnics, but I think it's the limitations, right? I think that when this came up, it was all the right idea, right? I think the Bears just followed the guidelines of what they were given, but I think that we whiffed, right? So I mean, I think that the number of people is the issue, and I think probably the number of days is the issue, and I think that's what should be explored. I mean, if Scott, if you were renting your house out for 90 days a year, I mean, I'd want to build a 12-foot wall, right? But if that's what you were able to do, it's against code, yeah. But so I think that it's like the picnic. I mean, maybe it's 6 people, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But again, you have to remember what the purpose of VRBO is. It's to be able to go somewhere and visit somewhere, and I don't think you're going to want. I wouldn't want it. Otherwise, you might as well just not have it, in my opinion. Just don't do it at all, because VRBO is about going on vacation with your family or a couple of friends and staying somewhere independent of others around there. That's me, though.
I'd be interested to know. I mean, I'm somewhat familiar with VRBOs and Airbnb. I've stayed in a few. I've stayed in them where the owners are there. I've stayed in where the owners are not there. I don't know if the majority of them are just business properties.
I think they are.
I think you're probably
right. In Florida, where we go, I mean, they're all investment properties, right? I mean, they're constantly being rented. This is a unique situation.
But I think with regard to that aspect of it, I mean, if you're going to limit a vacation rental to 60 days or 60 rentals, there's no way an investor is going to cover their cost for owning that property by renting their property for 60 days. I mean, we're going down to my brother-in-law's wedding, and we're staying in a place that is probably like a second condo with this person, and so they rent it out, so they don't have these restrictions. It is interesting though that one restriction they do have is that we're not allowed to have guests over. So it's limited to the people that are actually renting the property, so that you can't, have
no more people than villas.
Right, right.
I suppose if you continue to limit the permitted use to 60 days, you're right, the owner occupancy probably becomes a non-issue. But if it's a special use and they're wanting to do it 180 days or anytime they want or whatever, then I become concerned about it not being a residential property anymore.
What are other people's thoughts about this idea that you could have a special use category that would allow for venues or event spaces?
I'm open to that. I know that a handful of people on my block have had weddings in their family, at their home. So when I think about venues and having events there, it can be done well, but the big difference is that there's a personal connection to that property. So I think that would be that's my real concern. The people who are coming there to these events, they don't have that personal connection. With that said, I think that having a special use, would that be us evaluating it every time, basically, for every single piece of property?
It would be an evaluation. If I understand what Trustee Pollock's saying, yeah, you would evaluate that property as to whether we would allow those kind of events in that particular property.
And would that involve input from neighbors?
If it's a special use, it would.
Yeah, special use does require notification of the neighbors.
And then,
And an open meeting with a public hearing
yes.
before the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then it would come to the village board for final approval. So there'd be multiple meetings for them to have input.
Another variation on that, possibly, would be special event applications. So instead of, let's say you had a bed and breakfast that was limited to a certain number of people, people and pillows, like you were saying, but they wanted to have a wedding. They could follow the same process that organizations currently do now, fill out a special event application that would have to be reviewed and approved. And I mean, that would require, because right now we only allow organizations to do that. A person couldn't come in off the street and say, I want to have a special event on my street. So that would require more thinking through if we wanted to do something like that. But that would be another way to approach the venue idea.
And I'd have to look at the special event application, because I don't know if we permit it in residential areas. Obviously, we do it for certain community activities.
It doesn't.
So we would, okay.
Yeah. I mean, that would require a whole other way of looking at it.
Or would the special event application bypass the neighbor's input? Because it's no longer
It depends on how we would draft it.
There are certain special events that we require as part of the application process that they do notifications. So like the swim club had to do a notification for their most recent special event that they had with the big water slide. So there's just an example.
I would see if we utilize special event licensing, I would see that as after the special use is granted. So in other words, we approve a special use, and then whenever they have an event of so many people or more, they get a license or permit from us so that we know it's going on and our police department knows it's going on, and maybe there's a notification to neighbors that it's going on, kind of like a block party or something, And but I don't see that taking the place of a public hearing and addressing the terms and conditions of that venue's going to have or that house is going to have.
And can a special use permit require a fee? Sure.
It can be limited to a specific property owner. It can be limited. You could do a trial period where you say, okay, we'll grant this for 1 year and see how you do. And if you have violations, we're not going to renew it. It gives us quite a bit of flexibility, I believe. I think Attorney Mars would agree with that.
So I moved into a neighborhood to have neighbors, not transient guests. So I'm still having a hard time getting even past that. mean, if you're gonna have it 60 days of the year, your neighbor is not your neighbor, it's somebody that they're collecting cash from. Is that really why we moved into a neighborhood? How many of these do we have in town? 2, 3?
We have one right now, there's another one that's pending. It's out there while we're having this conversation. That's a condo.
I know we always joust around since we're neighbors, but I mean, if you were out of town and you had 12 people staying there next door and they were raising Cain all night, Chief would probably have to bring some body bags over, but I think that would be incredibly frustrating to those of you that are here. I get that. And so I think we need to really take a look at that, because we did, to use your term, whiffed on this. I thought we had good provisions in it to protect the folks, but we didn't. We used a square foot percentage piece that in bigger homes allows a lot of people, right? So that was a swing and a miss, big time. So we definitely need to, in my opinion, change that to stop that, right, wrong, or otherwise, right? And again, I think we did the right thing by not extending the days to make it more. 60 days is a lot to ask a neighbor to put up with a non-neighbor already. So I'm glad that we agreed not to increase that last time. But again, I think to focus on what can we do right now to the policy that we currently have that prevents a neighbor-on-neighbor situation like we had here last time. That's where my head. How do we get to that? Right? And that's what we really need.
What if you limited to your B1, B2 business districts? How would that affect the apartments and condos along?
Still people live there. So I mean, Attorney Mark said earlier, Riverside's unique in that all of our business districts have residential homes in them.
Yeah, but if you did that, you would not allow it in purely residential areas.
You would allow it only like in the condos, where.
But if I was in the condo, I mean,
which also brings you down to, 2 people.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah, you don't have a 5,000 square foot home to work with anymore. You have a 1,500 square foot condo.
And one of the things that we talked about is the kind of the impetus of this was the economic development, the economic churning, right, that we can do for the village. And we did not, my understanding is that the EDC never actually looked at this to determine whether or not there has been an impact, but it might be something, and they offered at the last commission meeting to do that, if it's something that the board would be interested in doing. I know the Planning and Zoning Commission looked through this extensively, but that was, my understanding was, I don't think I was on the board at the time that this was decided, but was economic development was trying to encourage people to come to town. Maybe that's happened. Maybe we don't have enough data points yet to determine if that is actually occurring, but it's something another piece of information that we can gather potentially out there to see if it has any impact on this analysis.
Any thoughts? Anybody out there have anything to say?
Yeah, I would say to be fair, we have one license, and so I think its impact has been minimal, seeing as it's just one. I think if we had more than that, we'd have more numbers to dig through, but at this point, I think it's been rented out maybe 40 days total between December and to date, so.
I think the residents would argue with the impact being minimal.
Well, I meant more from an economic development standpoint versus, right, more from an economic development standpoint versus obviously the neighborhood impact is more what I was speaking to.
Chelsea Tekalik, 155 Akenside Road. If you want to increase business in the district, this is not the way to do it. How much is this benefiting the village? Maybe $1,000 a year? I don't know. That's not the way to do it. You're ticking off all your neighbors. I want to be able to walk out my door that I'm paying $17,000 of taxes for, okay? Walk out my door, not listen to any strangers, not worry if a stranger's going to come into my yard or camp out in the middle of the night. I don't know. We don't have fences in the back of Akenside and Maplewood. Sorry, Misha. I want to be able to enjoy my property. I've been here for 25 years, and I love Riverside. I bought this house, like most of you, for a neighborhood, to be a neighbor. Hey, how you doing, Mr. Pollock, today? Is that the renter? Are they going to be a crazy person or anything like that? I mean, deep down inside, we know that this could happen. I mean, look at the society we live in today. It should be down to 0. No days, no Airbnb, no VRBO. We're concerned about too much signage in the village, and then you do this to us? It doesn't make sense.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So just as someone that lives in the area that is obviously opposed to it, the current house has committed to rentals, right?
Right.
Is it reasonable to allow them to go through with those?
Well, sure.
Assuming it were to go.
I think all of us said that we were agreed to let them, extend all the contracts out,
Right.
but I'm not for any Airbnb in the entire village. You can't control it. This is something that you can't control. A person who's purchasing that piece of property at the time, like renting that thing out, they have certain expectations. So you're having a good time, partying, all this, so all of a sudden the owner comes to you and says, hey, you're being too noisy, you have to be quiet. What do you think they're going to say to you? I paid for this. I'm not shutting up.
But back to my question, I don't think anyone said that the last meeting. I feel like the last meeting was incredibly contentious, and I'm actually somewhat embarrassed that I didn't try to interrupt some of the attacks that were going on. I think that hearing them, I get why I would want it.
Oh, sure.
Right, but here's my question again. There's commitments that have been made to some of these renters. As a resident in the area who's opposed to it, I'm just asking you, are you opposed to letting the Bears
I'm not
go through
opposed to
those
finish with the existing
what I'm
contracts.
asking,
No, I personally am not, and my husband is not, and my son is not. But that's it. I mean,
Yeah, no,
come
I get
on.
it. I just wanted to understand that.
I mean, this is nuts. I mean, there's other ways to get business for the village. This is not the way to do it.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say.
Josh Blomgren, 135 Akenside. Last time it got very contentious, and I'm not here to throw stones. We're talking about the ordinance, and I think it's easy to point the direction of the argument towards the one in the village because that's what it turned into last time. But I think the issues at hand are, what's the purpose of this? Is it designed to bring people to the village? If that's the case, then I would say, where are they staying? If they're staying in the business district, maybe that encourages them to stay in the business district. But if they're in a residential area, they can bring food from outside. I don't know if it necessarily directs traffic to the downtown area. So I'd maybe consider, for me, I'm opposed to any days. I don't think it's something that I want in the community. I moved here 2.5 years ago, and I think if I knew that that was the potential around me, I maybe would have looked elsewhere. If you do consider it, I would say limiting the number of people. If you take a large property, one person per 200 square feet, that's just inviting venues, events, added people. I don't think that a property should be able to sleep more people than our bedrooms. And so the current rental in question has 5 bedrooms. That's what it's listed on the MLS, so no more than 10 people. And I agree that there shouldn't be additional people invited because it just invites other things. 60 nights a year is a lot. That's 30 weekends if you're renting out 2 nights. And so that becomes disruptive to the people around. If you're going to make it in a residential area, it has to be special use. You have to get the permission of the neighbors that are paying for their house, paying for taxes to live there next to their neighbors. not next to renters. And I think the board has made some very valid points, and I think that it's something that I would like you to consider thoroughly as to whether or not an ordinance of this kind is even something that Riverside should be interested in. Thank you.
Thanks for having me back. Good evening, and first I want to thank the board for acknowledging that we did follow the ordinance as it was written. We applied for the permit. We had building inspectors and fire inspectors. We spent thousands of dollars in improvement to meet the ordinance. We paid the fee, and we've kept all the terms of the ordinance. And so, I guess I'd like to say that up front. I somehow, after the last meeting, I walked away thinking that my neighbors had thought I was a scofflaw or that I had violated the ordinance in some way. But I wanted to point that out. Secondly, I think two of the trustees mentioned they whiffed, and I don't know if I concur with your whiff, but I certainly had made mistakes in my learning how to be an Airbnb host. I had never done anything like this before, and so I certainly there was a steep learning curve, and I had some definite startup hiccups. Primarily, first of all, was permitting noise, and I know there were 2 instances where there was noise in our home after midnight, and we have apologized to all our neighbors for that. I have the curse of sleeping very soundly, and so I went to bed at 11 o'clock on those weekends where we do live on the property and we are there. When we have guests, there was one exception when we were in Israel and our 30-year-old son was on the property caring for it. But we are there, and I did not hear the noise. My husband woke up in the middle of the night to use the restroom and heard them, and we asked them to stop right away. And our guests were very compliant. They were very polite, and they apologized. The guests in question, the loud ones, were 4 elderly ladies who were on the back porch laughing way too late into the evening. The man who had rented it was actually the chief of police of Sugar Land, Texas. He is a law and order guy, and he apologized to us profusely that his little aunties, that his aunties were going on like that. We have taken steps to address the noise issue. We've installed signs all over our property. Quiet hours begin at 10, no hoops after 10, shh, be quiet, 10, quiet, everyone quiet. We've reiterated it to all of our bookings, and I've offered to cancel reservations and give money back to anyone who didn't feel that they were 100% on board with a 10 o'clock quiet time, and I did have several cancellations because of that, and I'm glad. I don't want people who are going to violate our noise ordinances or our quiet hours to be guests, and so several have canceled, but we do take this noise problem very seriously and have done what we feel like we can to address it, and we will no longer sleep so soundly. We'll be more vigilant when there are people, but for the most part, when we've expressed these concerns and these, when we've reiterated this 10 o'clock noise curfew, most of the guests have been very gracious and have agreed to comply. I know during, Sonia listed out the concerns that were discussed at the last meeting, and one, of course, was legal parking on the street, and we did not know that that was something that bothered our neighbors, and so we have asked all of our guests to park within our driveway, and we have secured a private arrangement for parking that might go beyond the number of cars that could fit in our driveway, and so we are hoping that will cure the problem. An issue that comes up in discussion now has been density, and I believe that the current ordinance at 200 square feet per person is quite consistent with most Airbnb type ordinances across the country and in our community. Our home is a large home. We raised a large family there, and we do have many beds. We often host our extended family, now our children and our grandchildren, and when they come, 25 people can sleep quite comfortably in beds. That's without people on floors and in windowsills. And so in terms of just human density, the house does accommodate that 200 square foot per person limitation quite nicely. Our intent when we started Airbnb was really, like my dream was to have family reunions, because we love joining our family together, and we realized that in Riverside there aren't a lot of venues. If your daughter's getting married, or if you're burying your parents and people are coming in to grieve or to celebrate, that you really don't have many options except the Presidential Inn or someplace on Ogden Avenue. And so our dream was to provide a venue for that. And in that we've been gratified that we've been successful to a large extent. There were 3 Fenwick grads who were in town to bury their parents, and they brought their wives and their children, and they had a beautiful weekend together, and after the wake or the interment, they had a repast back at our house, and they brought their great aunts and their cousins, and there were probably 30 people that day at our home grieving these folks who had passed away. Events appears to be is a topic that's come up, and it seems to be a separable issue. And if the board decided to take events out and put it in a different category, in another place, that I think that's actually a good idea, because then there would be some regulatory predictability, and we would know what we're all dealing with, and that makes very good sense to me that events should perhaps come under a different category. Owner occupancy came up in this conversation, and I'll restate, we are owners, we still occupy it, and I am still a neighbor. Just because we have visitors coming to celebrate a wedding or to bury a parent doesn't mean I'm not your neighbor anymore, so I'm still in the neighborhood. The topic of strangers has come up, and I guess I had always imagined Riverside was a very welcoming, inclusive community. I just thought that we loved outsiders, that we love visitors. I know I do. I know I love meeting new people. I know the village board adopted that very beautiful resolution saying that we welcome visitors and we welcome outsiders. And so our strangers who have come to visit have contributed to the economy of Riverside. We had a group of 12 people, walk over to Sawmilly the other day to have lunch. I've seen guests that we've had at La Barra, and I know that they've purchased items at Riverside Foods, and some have been to Molly's, and so our guests do contribute to the economy of Riverside. I can't imagine with being the only licensee that we haven't, I don't believe we've sent Riverside through the roof economically, but we have contributed, which I thought was part of our original mission in establishing Airbnbs, to contribute to the economy and to invite others to come and discover this beautiful village we have. And so, thank you for your time. I, again, apologize to my neighbors who have become angry with me. I hope that the steps that we've taken to correct some of the problems will be effective. We love living in Riverside. We would love to stay living in Riverside. This option of having Airbnb makes a lot of sense for us since we no longer have our 10 children and my ailing father-in-law living in our home. In the fall, we'll just have our 2 youngest boys, and for us, it justifies staying in the town, that we could use the beautiful space that we have to introduce others to Riverside and to welcome back families like Scuff Gross's family who contacted me to see if they could rent our place, so people who have left Riverside can come back and continue to enjoy it. So thank you for your time.
I have a question for you, Donna.
Come on up. Come on.
Out of the 60 or all the rentals.
I'm gonna interrupt here. I don't think this is really appropriate to be questioning one another.
Okay. I just wanted to know how many Riverside residents actually rented the property and all the days. That's all.
Okay, so staff will work with the comments we received tonight. I think the best course would be to try to tighten things up first, bring something back for you to look at to see if we can address some of these concerns.
I just want to get.
What?
It's very quick. It's just
Okay.
something to think about.
Okay.
No, I just.
We're getting very tired up here.
Okay,
We've been
Virginia
here-
Latner, 136. Just something to think about with the whole idea. Have you, if to consider coach houses? I know they're not allowed to have full-time double occupancy residents. Would they be allowed to open it up? And I'm just something to think about for VRBO.
Just really quick for clarification, because I want to confirm before staff moves forward, based on Trustee Pollock's request on the special use component, does this in any way need to go back to Planning and Zoning Commission?
We're not going to get there yet. Direction.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not going to get to that point yet. But hopefully we'll be able to address this with modifications to the existing ordinance.
Some of the important things are limiting the number of residents.
I made a list.
Guests and things like that.
Right. Okay. So we have no new business. We do have a need for an executive session to discuss the purchase or lease of real property or setting the price for sale or lease of village property and to discuss probable or imminent litigation. So I'd ask for a motion to adjourn to executive session, not to reconvene. No final decisions will be made. Motion by Mr. Lumsden, second by Ms. Peters. Please call the roll.
Trustee Pollard.
Aye.
Trustee Giuseppe.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Ballard.
Aye.
Trustee Sutton. Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you and good night.